Sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Ezra Levant, absolute total expert on the subject matter. Ezra here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ezra here in Toronto, testing 1, 2, 3. Hey, Sheila, Ezra here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine. There's a little bit of static or white noise, though.
Yeah, I hear that.
Olivia? Yeah. It's worse? It's worse now?
It's the same. I hear the same.
Yeah. That's better.
Hi, everybody. Ezra Levant here in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and I'm joined by my friend Sheila Gunn-Reid out there in northern Alberta. Today is the day of the leadership debate in the Ontario provincial election. Sheila, how you doing out west?
I'm great. I know a lot of people are going to be wondering why would an Albertan care what happens in Ontario, but Ontario is the center of the universe, as Ontarians like to think, and as the Canadian government treats them. But so many of Justin Trudeau's bad ideas over the last little bit have come from Ontario. For example, Doug Ford, he actually went to court to seize the Convoy to Ottawa's money 4 days before Justin Trudeau invoked the Emergencies Act. So if you care about civil liberties and you care about the way things are going in this country, we all have to keep a watchful eye on Ontario.
Well, that's the thing. Of course, it's the biggest province, financially biggest province in terms of population. And because Doug Ford calls himself a conservative, what irks me is that his authoritarian impulses, his crush any dissent, keep lockdowns going, listen to the fear-mongers' impulses, they give a bad name to conservatism everywhere and anywhere. I mean, it's one thing to have liberals do atrocious things, but when someone does so and says this is what conservatives do, conservatives lock down churches, conservatives give massive fines to people, conservatives deploy hundreds of police against restaurants that dare to open, conservatives believe in mask theater, then it's something that everyone in this country who calls himself a conservative should weigh in on and say, no, it's not, you wicked liar. And if that's what you are as a conservative, we should throw you out, because we'll have no worse with the liberals, but we'll have a chance to get a better conservative. Exactly what happened to Erin O'Toole. Erin O'Toole was thrown out. Good. A chance for the party to pick a real conservative, federally speaking.
Well, and, you know, when you look at the federal party right now, they are really, I guess, for all intents and purposes, campaigning against Doug Ford's policies, because Doug Ford, again, calls himself a conservative. But when you look at the slate of federal leadership contestants, Jean Charest and Patrick Brown, the least in touch and the most out of step with mainstream conservatism, they're the ones closest to Doug Ford on the issue of lockdowns and the convoy. Patrick Brown, Jean Charest have both come out and spoken against the convoy. Doug Ford was the guy who said, let's move, let's go to court and seize the convoy's money. Right. He did that on February 10th. Justin Trudeau did it on February 14th. So Doug Ford was beating Justin Trudeau to all these bad ideas. And as you say, it puts him way out of step with conservatives as a whole.
Yeah. And Doug Ford says that his best friend every night on the phone is Chrystia Freeland. So we know who's running whom. Now, listen, Sheila, it's going to be a big debate. The debate is hosted by two government journalists, no surprise. In Ontario, this might surprise people outside this province, but there are two state broadcasters, actually three. The biggest one, of course, is Trudeau's CBC state broadcaster. There's also a French language provincial broadcaster called TV Francais Ontario, TFO. And then TVO is another state broadcaster. That's what's hosting this today. Steve Paikin is the government journalist. I know Steve, and I think he's probably the least worst of the government journalists, but he's still a government journalist. And Althea Raj is co-hosting. She's Justin Trudeau's biographer. So you know she's going to call it straight. She also works for CBC and the Toronto Star. So really, that's the media party. It'll be interesting to see if all the questions are the drumbeats of the left. Climate change this, more taxes that, give us some, denounce anyone who disagrees as racist, bring back the masks, more taxes. I just think it's going to be atrocious. That starts at 6:30 Eastern, 4:30 p.m. Mountain Time. So we have about 54 minutes until then. But Sheila, I got to tell you, we have such a pre-game lineup. I can't even believe it. I don't know if we're going to be able to jam it all in. Let me say a really quick thing before I tell you the 7 guests we have lined up for the next hour. It's unbelievable.
What am I doing here?
Yeah. I was reading the CBC story on the debate, and they said the four major party leaders. I'm thinking, okay, so there's Doug Ford, the conservative. There's Stephen Del Duca, the liberal. There's Andrea Horwath, the New Democrat. Who's the big four? Who's the major? That's the word they use. Who's the major party in fourth place? Now, I've been living here in Toronto for so long, I can no longer say I'm a displaced Westerner. You live somewhere long enough, the moss starts to grow on the north side. The roots go. I'm an Ontarian. I have never heard of the fourth person on the stage tonight, Mike Schreiner. Have you ever heard of Mike Schreiner? The name you know. Come on, Sheila. He's a major political leader. No, you haven't heard of him either? He's so major, he won a single seat for his party last time, the Green Party. The total vote for the Green Party in all of Ontario was 4.6%, and they're calling him a major party leader, but they're excluding conservative parties, smaller, truer conservative parties on the right. The New Blue Party, they have an MPP, Belinda Karahalios. There's Derek Sloan's party. Randy Hillier. I mean, there are lots of people with one seat in Parliament, but the only ones who were permitted was the Green Party. They would not let the small parties on the right. You know, if they would have said just the three main parties, I would say, okay, I get it. Or if they would have said all the little parties too that have a seat in Parliament, I'd get it. But they didn't do that. They said only the Green Party is the only party with a single seat that we will allow there. I think that sort of tells you how this debate's going to go.
Yeah, we see this happen at the federal level all the time, where they try to normalize the fringe wackadoos in the Green Party by including them on the stage with actual parties. Take whatever you think about the Liberals and the NDP, at least they're actual parties. And, you know, they perennially trot out Elizabeth May as though she's not some sort of crazy person, but purposefully exclude Maxime Bernier from these kinds of things. And it is, you know, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. They say, okay, well, these guys don't have any seats, so you don't get to hear from them, but they'll never get any seats if you don't let us hear from them. It's, you know, they're too afraid of the good ideas that people might hear, so they keep trotting out the weirdos nobody cares about.
I remember Elizabeth May, when she was invited time after time in the leaders' debates, she was really an attack dog for Trudeau. I remember one year, I can't remember if it was 2011 or what it was, every single attack she made was against Harper. She never criticized Justin Trudeau, not once, which is rather odd. You would think that you would criticize. I mean, it's just quite something. It'll be interesting to see if Mike Schreiner, the name you know, from the Green Party, does the same thing. I mean, in fairness,
sorry,
Doug,
Ezra, I don't want to interrupt you here, but I was just poking around on the CBC's poll tracker, so take that as whatever you will. Naturally, the PCs are out in front. Liberals are sort of trailing about 8 points back. ND's just behind the Liberals. The Greens are at under 5%. And then you have other at approaching 7%. Now, I guarantee you that other is probably New Blue, mostly New Blue. But they can't even say the name of New Blue. They have the Greens on there. And, you know, it should be remarkable because the other, they've actually bumped up a full percentage point this week.
Yeah.
But that's not enough to mention them, while, you know, the Greens have ticked up 0.1%, and that's notable.
You know, it's funny you say that. I just went to this CBC Ontario poll tracker. I see it's on the screen now. If you scroll down, they break it down by region. So in Toronto proper, 25 seats, other is rather modest. But in the Greater Toronto area, other is 6%. In Hamilton, Niagara, other is 8%. In southwestern Ontario, it's 9.5%. In northern Ontario, 10.4% are for, quote, other, almost double the Greens, almost catching up with the Liberals there. So your point is exactly right. What is called other, to marginalize them and dename them, is actually twice as large as Green, in depending on how you measure.
I mean, but as you say, they don't even want to mention their name. let alone say, like, this is quite amazing that they're 10.5% in Northern Ontario.
Yeah. And I love how they call Mike Schreiner the major party leader. He got 4.5%. He's the only one in the party of one. It's like when you go to a restaurant and you're sort of a lonely bachelor. Party of one. Party of one. Woo! Party of one. Party tonight. You know what? Once in my life, I went to a movie by myself, Sheila.
No.
And I mean,
was your mom busy?
If you go to a movie by yourself, that's sort of sad. It's also, you show some confidence. I'm okay with my own company. I just want to go out, stretch my legs. I don't want to just sit home in front of the TV. Going to a movie by yourself is a little weird. And I think party of one, Mike Schreiner, a major party leader, is just as weird. Now, Sheila, you and I were talking about leadership debates just last week when the Conservative Party of Canada, the federal Liberal, was having its internecine debates, Pierre Poilievre, Jean Charest, etc. The disaster of that debate was Tom Clark, the moderator, who had bizarre rules, and perhaps he didn't even make the rules, but he was so abusive and irritating in how he enforced them. Do you think we're going to have that same issue tonight? I think Steve Paikin is a little bit of a better journalist and a little bit more a sane individual than who wants a good show. What do you think it's going to be like, the actual format?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot better. I mean, we have Althea Raj, so she's going to be sort of pro Trudeau, and by pro Trudeau I mean pro Doug Ford, probably, since those two go hand in hand. But Steve Paikin is boring. I know nothing about his personality, and I think that's what will make him probably the perfect debate moderator here. Tom Clark wanted it to be the Tom Clark show. He wanted to be the star of the show. He gave 90 seconds worth of preamble to allow for a 15-second response from the candidates. I think we're probably going to see the complete and total opposite of that. And I think Steve Paikin, he's a more serious journalist, and he would likely have seen whatever that hot garbage pile of a performance Tom Clark put on, and he'll say, no thanks, not for me. That's not how I want people to remember me. Yeah. I'm hoping, because I had to suffer through Tom Clark, being in the same room as Tom Clark, as people reacted to Tom Clark. I can't go through it again, Ezra. I just can't.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, the list of Canadian journalists and pundits who chair these political debates is pretty small, and I think they all watch each other, not only because they're curious people about politics, but they want tips and tricks for themselves. And I think the Conservative Party's disaster last week will probably improve the Ontario debates this week. Well, Sheila, I can see by the clock on the wall that it's already 5:45, and let me check with our team in the control room. We are setting up our first interview is with Derek Sloan, former member of Parliament who has taken over the Ontario Party, which is one of those, quote, other parties that was not permitted in, even though the, quote, other parties, depending on where you are in the province, are polling in double digits. I think I see Derek Sloan now joining us via Skype. Derek, can you hear me?
I can. How is everybody doing?
Doing great. I'm here in Toronto. Our friend Sheila Gunn-Reid is observing from Alberta, letting the western side of Rebel News know what's going on in the biggest province of all. We were just talking, Sheila and I, about the choice for the leaders in this debate. I understand the big three parties. They're the incumbents. They all have multiple seats, and actually all three of them have formed government in Ontario over the years. But to choose the Green Party, which has a single seat, which is polling around 4% or less, and to make the rules so your party and Jim Karahalios' party and any other small parties on the right are banned, even though these small Conservative parties have a seat in Parliament. That's quite some trickery, isn't it?
Well, it's clear they're afraid of us. I don't think they want us on that debate stage. And you're right, there are polls that show us polling at the same level or even higher than the Green Party, depending on what you're looking at. So it is troubling.
Let me invite my friend Sheila in. I mean, Sheila is an honorary debate observer because she's not an Ontarian, but she knows a lot about the issues that matter to all Canadians, civil liberties, the economy. Sheila, what questions do you have for Derek Sloan as the leader of a grassroots Conservative Party trying to break in?
Well, Derek, you have an MP, do you not? You've got, who's your MP? Rick Nichols?
Rick Nichols. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So what excuse did they give you for not being included in this debate while the Greens are? Did they give you an official excuse?
So they haven't, but what they're typically saying is that your MP needs to be elected as a member of that party. So in Rick's case, he was elected as a progressive Conservative, not as a member of the Ontario Party, and so that's kind of what they're using to disqualify us.
Now, sorry, Ezra, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, Derek, we only have a few minutes with you, so I'd like you to put any ideas you would want viewers to see. If you were in this debate, what points would you make? If you had to sum up, let's say, one positive point that you'd like people to know about your party and one criticism that you'd have for the incumbents, what points would you make?
Yeah, so we've been fighting really strongly on medical freedom and medical privacy. So that means the choice to decide what kind of treatments you undergo, and also the ability to make sure that your information is shielded so that you know that you don't have to show it to the cashier at Montana's the next time you're at a restaurant. Another issue that's a criticism would be being against the digital ID. And I think that's a major encroachment of the surveillance state. It's something that the PCs have pledged to do. We've been fighting hard against that, and we actually had a petition that had tens of thousands of signatures that we tabled in the legislature and did a press conference on it. This is a very important issue that many Ontarians are waking up to, and I think that we need to fight against this kind of encroachment of civil liberties.
All right. Sheila, last word to you before we say goodbye to Derek?
Sure. Derek, where should we keep an eye on as far as Ontario Party breakthroughs? Do you have any key ridings where you think that you're going to see a surge in your support?
Yeah, so Rick Nichols' riding, Chatham, Kent, Leamington, of course, is a good place to watch. My own riding of Hastings, Lennox, and Addington is a good place to watch. There's some other areas out there as well. Oxford, the riding of Oxford is an important riding. But any rural riding, I think, is a good bellwether riding. But we're seeing some support in the cities as well. So I'm not necessarily expecting that we're going to win, lots of seats in the city, but we certainly have a baseline of support everywhere, whether it's rural or city.
All right. Well, Derek Sloan, great to have you joining us today. Thanks very much, and good luck out there on the campaign trail.
Hey, glad to be here. Thanks so much. Good to see you both.
Right on. Thanks.
Thank you.
There you have it, Derek Sloan, who was kept out of the debate. Folks, I understand we have some low audio for my mic and Sheila's mic. Our team is aware of that. We'll be working on fixing that for you. We got to move along quickly because we have so many folks we want to talk to in the pregame show. And then Sheila and I are going to do our best to, it's easy for Sheila, it's harder for me, to stay quiet while watching the debate. These debates get me, I just have a scowl on me when I listen to.
It's true.
Well, this is going to be the worst because there is no one on that stage who's fighting for smaller government or civil liberties or anything like that. I think one of the reasons Pierre Poilievre on the federal level is generating some excitement in the Conservative Party is he is finally talking about civil liberties and getting the economy under control and stopping inflation, things that so far, for the last few years, only Maxime Bernier was talking about. Yeah. So if Pierre Poilievre wins that leadership, he'll bring those arguments to the debate. There will actually not be much of a debate tonight, I predict. In fact, if anything, they'll try and outdo each other for who's a bigger masker. Stephen Del Duca has said he'll bring back masks for children if he wins. So anyways, I understand that our friend David Menzies, mission specialist, is on the scene. We just need one more minute to set up the connection with him. We have we have a delegation of Rebel News reporters on the scene at the debate. I'm pleased to say that unlike the federal debate, where Justin Trudeau twice in a row now has kept out Rebel News, and we had to go to court twice in a row, TVO said no problem. In fact, Sheila, I think you were, as our chief reporter, you signed us up for that. Am I right?
Yeah, we actually had so many journalists sign up that TVO said, hold your horses, Rebel News. We can't get all of you in here. Send 2 people so that you can be inside, ask questions in the scrum and report from inside. So we have Tamara Ugolini and Lincoln Jay, who are inside the building doing real journalism and hopefully asking real questions as opposed to the media cabal consortium, whatever they call it, coven, if you will. They'll be asking questions that Ontarians really want answers to, not when are you bringing back masks and why aren't you jabbing those little kids a little bit sooner? You are right, Ezra. This is going to be 4 people standing on the stage saying, no, you should have locked him down sooner. Why didn't you lock him down sooner? When are you bringing back masks? Why aren't you jabbing little kids? It's a bunch of people saying you didn't lock down soon enough and hard enough. And that's what's going to happen tonight.
Yeah, and I'm sure there'll be calls for more spending and more taxing.
Oh, yeah.
And there's going to be
raises.
Yeah, I mean,
raises for healthcare workers that never end. Sure.
I just want to one last comment on the accreditation. It does not bother me that TVO said, okay, whoa, you're having so many people signing up just for managing the numbers. Can we just limit it as everyone else
I'm happy.
That doesn't really bother me because I know it's not an attempt. I don't believe it's an attempt to censor us. No. I do believe it's a chance to treat us equally. And they did not object and they did not threaten and they did not ban and they did not denigrate. So I find this very encouraging. And in fact, I should tell you that I shared this news with our lawyers who are in court on the federal side, because it's only that weirdo Trudeau who tries to ban us. We've been accredited in a great number of places, from the White House to the Court of Queen's Bench to, the Israeli Knesset to the UK Parliament to Iraq. It's just so weird to me that Justin Trudeau has this obsession. So it's nice to see that even the state broadcaster of TV Ontario has welcomed us. And now I see that our friend David Menzies is on location outside of TVO with Isabel, his trusty camera person. So let's go live now to David, who's waiting outside. David, how you doing out there?
I'm doing great, Ezra. We just got here to TV Ontario headquarters about 10 minutes ago. By the way, en route on a side street, we saw the Andrea Horwath bus park, this enormous coach. It was parked illegally, one. Secondly, the generator was idling. I don't think it's the lithium crystals coming out of the tailpipe. And I thought these people are all about reducing our carbon footprint and, going green. But I guess, as we saw during the pandemic, Ezra, one rule for thee, one rule for me. Now, there's a couple of protests here. One is comprised of about 120 nurses, I would estimate. They're upset that they weren't compensated better than they were during the pandemic. One said they only got a 1% raise. And of course, right behind me are members of the New Blue Party, including the leader, Jim Karahalios. I think you're going to be interviewing him later. And they're very upset that they are excluded from the debate. Jim's position is, I meet the criteria in that I have a candidate in every riding and I have an elected MPP, namely his wife, Belinda. But the organizers seem to be saying, check out the fine print, which is to say your MPP had to be elected under the current banner that he or she is running for. Personally, I don't understand what the difference is. An elected MPP is an elected MPP, but they've excluded him and the people here are not happy about that.
Well, I see them out in force behind you with some signs. Are there any other partisans there? Are there liberals? Are there conservatives? Are there New Democrats? Or is it just the New Blue behind you?
It seems like the New Blue. We have seen individual people, ones and twos, Ezra, carrying a liberal placard or a PC placard. But the two main dueling group, well, I shouldn't call them dueling groups because I think they're on the same page. ABD, anybody but Doug. That's what the nurses told me. I'm sure that's how Jim and his cohorts feel. But we're just waiting to see if the leaders are still on their way. Well, I'm pretty sure Andrea Horwath's on the way. We couldn't miss that giant pumpkin-colored bus of hers that was idling, but maybe the Liberals and the PCs and geez, I wonder what Mike Schreiner, the leader of the Green Party, is going to show up in. Maybe it's a horse-drawn carriage like Cinderella. Who knows? But we're still here waiting to see if they're arriving because it's unclear if they're in the building or not.
Right on. Well, thank you. If you do spot the Schreiner mobile, you got to let us know what it's powered by, because there's a chance the guy biked. I'll put that in like the 1 in 100 chance. But he probably came in on diesel, and it's probably parked a few blocks away, idling as well. Now, Sheila's on the line from out west, and, you know, she has the same problem in Alberta that Ontario has, which is a Conservative party and a Conservative premier that's actually as far from the Conservative tenets of freedom and limited government as it gets. Sheila, do you have any questions or thoughts for David?
Sure, David. Are the folks from Yahoo Nation out there? Do you have any like counter protesters who are conservative but not partisans like the New Blues?
I don't see, and we bumped into one person who used to be, well, he's a current member of Yahoo Nation. He would have been a member of Ford Nation going back 4 or 2 years ago, rather, when the pandemic kicked in. And he indicated he's not going to vote PC. And, you know, it's funny because the polls are showing Doug Ford in the lead. As you know, last week he was in Northern Ontario. Doug Ford did not take questions there, and that really peeved off the mainstream media because the Toronto people flew all the way north. I mean, can you imagine? They probably had to say in a Super 8 or something like that, opposed to the Four Seasons. And, you know, I think the strategy, Sheila, is that they don't want Doug to say anything that will skewer his popularity if that popularity does indeed exist. They don't want him to be the victim of a gotcha question. So that's a question for tonight. Will he join the other three leaders and actually take questions? I think he should. I think as a premier, you owe it to the people of the province. You owe it to your constituents. But I guess we'll see after the debate.
Yeah. Well, David, I'm glad you're down there. Rebel is doing a really good job of covering this because we love to cover things like this. It's insane that the federal Liberals don't let us cover those leadership debates. But I promise you we will keep going. And as long as they keep blocking us, we will keep suing them and hopefully keep winning. So I'm glad that you and the team inside is allowed to go inside. So thanks. And hopefully we'll have an update from you a little bit later.
And one other parting shot, if I may, Ezra, it's not just not getting into debates, but as you know, earlier this month when Ford kicked off the election at the Toronto Congress Centre, we weren't allowed in. Right. I've been going to Ford family events for at least 15 years. Welcome with open arms. Joe Warmington of the Toronto Sun. My goodness, for 2 decades, I can think of no other mainstream media journalist that has given the Fords such fair coverage. He was banned from entry. And yet you see the Toronto Star, who Doug and his late great brother Rob once called a bunch of maggots. They're welcomed in with open arms. Torstar gets a $500 million contract for a gambling license. They still haven't launched the darn thing. So everything's upside down. And all I can think of, Ezra, is that maybe Ford is in the Ontario voters' mindset that for the last 100 years or so, it seems that whenever there's a Liberal government in Ottawa, it's a PC government or a different government in Queen's Park and vice versa. And maybe that's why he's so buddy-buddy with Trudeau. Who would have thunk it?
Yeah. You know, both you and you mentioned our friend Joe Warmington of the Toronto Sun, probably the most pro-Ford journalist in Ontario, especially when Rob Ford, the late Rob Ford, was the beleaguered mayor. Not a single journalist in town would give him a fair shake, except for you and Joe Warmington, and the fact that Ivana Yelich, Brian Lilly's mistress, would kick the two of you out of there. It's just outrageous. And it just shows how far Doug Ford has strayed from everything. Well, listen, David, thanks for the report and keep in touch.
Thank you, Ezra. Thank you, Sheila.
Thanks, David.
All right. Well, if we're staying on our calendar, and I think we should, our friend Tamara Ugolini is on deck. I don't think she's ready this very second, but while we wait for her to connect, why don't we play a clip of Stephen Del Duca, the Liberal leader, saying he wants to go back and be tougher on masks and vax. Do we have that clip? I just think, I just want our viewers, especially those outside Ontario, to take a look at this. Okay, we're getting the clip. I know, I see them gathering up. There's so many clips, and we got one from Lincoln Jay we'll take a look at later. But let's look at this one from Ontario Liberal leader Stephen Del Duca.
Roster of vaccines that.
Oh, we don't see it
so
on
today
the screen.
I'm here to
guys.
announce that if elected, Ontario Liberals will make the COVID-19 vaccine for kids part of the universal roster of vaccines that are required for kids to attend publicly funded schools right across the province of Ontario.
Oh, God. He reminds me of the Geico gecko. He does that thing with his lips.
I don't know. I think that really Canada is one of the last places in the world that's locking down and masking and forced vaccine, other than China, which has simply gone mad. I see in some countries they've just completely removed any more limits. Airlines in Europe, we're sending, I mean, just travel around the world. It's just most places around the world, the lockdowns, the masks, the forced vaxes are all in the dustbin of history. I read an interesting piece today in the paper co-authored by Duncan Dee, former Vice President of Air Canada, who says one of the problems for Canadian air travel is Americans coming up here, they haven't kept their vaccine card. Because why would they keep some old thing to show Trudeau? A lot of Americans have thrown away their vax cards or didn't keep them on them because they don't need it to show their vax cops in that country. Canada is such a backward place in that regard. It's really quite sad. I see our friend Tamara Ugolini is ready. Let's go and say hello to her and get her take. Hey, Tamara, how you doing today?
Hello, everyone. Well, thanks. How are you guys doing there in studio?
Where are you joining us from today?
So I'm at the TVO studios on Yonge Street in Toronto, where they are hosting the final leader debate happening here tonight, scheduled to start at 6:30. So I think we're about 20 minutes off from that. And there's a large protest out front. I think that you already had David Menzies on, showing you the crowd out there, mostly for New Blue Ontario. And so we're in here in the media department, and we are, I guess, watching the debates live from another room. So it's kind of strange. We also have to watch the debates from a screen with the rest of the media party, and then we will be able to pose our questions thereafter.
Can I ask you a few questions about the other media? And I'm sure Sheila has a few too. First of all, are they, like, how are they? Are they masked up and wearing goggles and hazmat suits?
So it was the beautiful smell of sanitizer on the way in. And yes, I think that there was the ask. They ask you to wear a mask. And so everyone here is, apart from when you pull it down, to have it just as a chin diaper. But otherwise, it looks like everyone is complying with that mask ask. And of course, they're frivolously putting on the sanitizer upon entry.
Now, you are not our most notorious rebel. I think that honor might go to our friend David Menzies, or maybe sometimes, once upon a time, even myself. But for those who recognize you with Rebel News, are any of the other, are the media, are they chatting, are they interacting, or are they all just getting ready for their work? I guess what I want to say is, I know some of the other media don't like it when we get accredited. Have they interacted with you at all on this matter?
So far, I mean, I'm very cordial and polite and smiles. I'm not hiding mine behind a mask, as you can see, and I didn't do that upon entry either. So far, very friendly, chatting amongst themselves. Lincoln and I, as soon as we get here, we're right to work. We're filming an introduction for the segment. We're on here live streaming with you. So I see them chatting in there, but so far, as much as you can tell from behind a mask anyway, I saw some smizing toward me, which was nice to see, but I'm happy to be here and be polite and cordial.
Listen, Tamara, you are one of the politest rebels around, it's for sure, and we're so glad you're our ambassador there. Sheila, what questions do you have for our friend Tamara?
Yeah, I was going to say that Tamara and Lincoln are always great Rebel brand ambassadors. They are never what the mainstream media thinks they are. You sort of burst their preconceived notions about us here at Rebel News. What do you think we're going to hear from the debate moderators? Do you think they're going to be the kind of Tamara Ugolini, I'm going to smack you across the head with COVID statistics questions, or are they just going to be boring climate change?
I wonder if that conservative leadership debate moderator, Tom, was anything, as a precursor to what this will be. We can see that there are obviously two mainstream journalists that are, as we know, left-leaning. So I'm excited to see how that will go. But yeah, I definitely have my reservations there in terms of how really pressing and adequate the questions will be for the Canadian public, especially the Canadian public that we so know and love.
Yeah. If we have two moderators of this debate, one is a government broadcaster for the TV Ontario government, and the other is the government broadcaster with the CBC, Althea Raj, you're not going to get any questions today challenging the central role of government. If you have government journalists interviewing government candidates about the government, odds are they like government. You're not going to have a small government deregulate civil liberties question. I think that this cake is already baked. Listen, Tamara, I'm thrilled that you're there. Thank you for attending, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say after the debate's done.
Thank you. Yes, happy streaming.
All right, there you have it. Tamara Ugolini on location inside the TVO HQ. I want to see if Lincoln J., another one of our super polite rebels, is handy. Lincoln J., of course, very famous for his coverage of the trucker convoy in Ottawa. He would live stream, keep a cool head in that mad world. And he is also on location. I understand he did a little video that he sent in already. If we're waiting for Lincoln live, why don't we play that prepared vid of some of the protesters that he took while outside the building? How's that? Here we go. And I want to talk to Lincoln live if we can, but here's what Lincoln saw when he arrived. That actually looks like a little bit of fun.
Yeah. Although, they have the crowd sort of pushed up against the sidewalk, so it looks a lot deeper and thicker than it actually is.
Yeah.
And look, we found all the Green Party supporters. That's literally all of them right there.
What?
They drove a small car there.
Hey, ho, ho, Doug Ford has got to go. I think that's what they were chanting. They can be, when I was a young man in the 20th century, I was involved in politics as a young person, and I took great pride at coming up with creative chants, not just hey, ho, ho, Doug Ford's got to go. I mean, 2, 4, 6, 8, or 1, 3, 5, 7. Like you could, and then, 2, 4, 6, 8. There's just so many rhymes and slogans.
Then let's hear one, Ezra. Let's hear one right now. Let's go.
Well, you know what? I'm panicking because I was just going to say an extremely rude one. And I'm not sure just how rude I should get. But I just think the hey, ho, ho, they can do better.
It's done. It's done.
Yeah. All right. Well, you know what? Now I've sort of embarrassed myself because I didn't have those chants handy. Here I am after condemning their chants. But come on, give me a reason. Or make it fun, or make it catchy, or make me want to remember it and sing it. I was just showing the lab the other day. some British soccer chants. Yeah. And the Brits they have so many, like they might know 100 little chants, and they break them out. And they don't even have to make a lot of sense. There's lots of swearing in them. But even just, that was embarrassing. That was embarrassing. Like just, just have something with some meaning, not just, hey, hey, ho, ho, you got to go.
That was embarrassing, though.
That was embarrassing. But you know what? I mean, surely, the left, they're the creative types. They're the, they can do,
it's always the stupid, this is what democracy looks like. And I'm like purple hair? I guess so. Yeah. They have the two things that they chant, and that's it.
All right. Well, I feel like I didn't live up to my own hype there for...
Not at all. Nope.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I'll have to fix that up. Well, we have a couple minutes before our next guest, Jim Karahalios, is ready. And he, of course, is the leader of the New Blue Party. His wife, Belinda Karahalios, is their sitting MPP. I just find it such a stitch-up, as they'd say in the UK, an inside job that you've got three little parties, or maybe more, but the only one that gets in is the one that's in full accord with the government's approved message track on. I've said this a lot, but I remember when that first poll came out about the truckers. It was done by Abacus, which is a liberal-leaning firm. They're chaired by Bruce Anderson, the liberal. I remember the very first poll on the truckers, and it was sort of beautifully phrased. I'll give them credit. Do you see yourself in the convoy? Do you see yourself reflected by the truckers? That's a really nice way of putting it. And you know which party, and then it broke it down by answerers. The number one group of supporters for the truckers in the country were people who identified with Maxime Bernier's People's Party. Makes sense. But you know what was in second place? The Green Party. 53% of Green Party supporters told Abacus, I'm going from memory, but I think I got it, 53% of Green Party supporters said they saw themselves reflected in the truckers, Sheila. You might say, how is that? Well, outsiders, rebels, dissidents, don't trust big pharma. So here you've got the Green Party in sync with big government. I think the Greens will do poorly this time. I understand that Jim Karahalios is now ready to go. He is outside the building with his supporters behind him, and he joins us now.
How are you? Can you
Jim,
hear me?
it's Ezra here with Sheila Gunn-Reid. We're live streaming. Can you hear us?
Great. I can hear you guys loud and clear. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you betcha. We see the signs behind you. You got a lot of folks out there. Tell us, did you try and get in there? Did you apply to get on the debate stage?
Well, it's a secret media consortium, Ezra, and we've been trying for weeks to find out who's the person at CTV, who's the person at Global in charge of this fake debate, and they won't even give us a name. And then they published the rules 4 days ago, and they say you got to have a candidate in every riding. New Blue Party was the first political party in this election campaign to have a candidate registered in every riding. And they say you have to have an MPP under your banner. Well, Ezra, you know, my wife, the lovely Belinda Karahalios, the MPP in the riding of Cambridge, up for re-election. Those are the rules that they made. And they broke their own rules, Ezra, to deny us and allow the Liberal Party to be on the debate stage. And we're out here Main Streeting, talking to people on Yonge Street and letting the establishment media know that showed up that, you know, the secret media consortium, they didn't like to follow their own rules because they don't want the New Blue Party on the stage.
Yeah, I mean, it is nominally a private debate. It's not run by the government, but that doesn't really have a lot of meaning when it's TV Ontario, a state broadcaster, and a journalist from the CBC state broadcaster. It seems a little, we've got...
there we go.
We want Jim!
Well, we hear your crowd behind you. Jim, if you were on the stage, what would be the number one thing you would tell Ontarians about the New Blue Party? And what would be the number one criticism you have for the incumbents?
Well, we're just talking about the values and principles, Ezra, that are binding Ontario voters across this province, and kind of some of the things that Doug Ford said he would do, but betrayed his 2.3 million voters once he got into office. And we're also talking about the things the establishment media and the establishment parties don't want to talk about, like scrapping that $100 million per vote subsidy for the political parties in Ontario. They've taken over $100 million in 10 years to run their party operations, run these fancy ads, campaign time. We got to scrap that. You know, that online gambling license that Dave and I talked about in your studios a couple of weeks ago for the Toronto Star. Doug Ford and the PC's giving them a lifeline, the Toronto Star, and we want to cancel it, lowering hydro rates by getting rid of the wind turbines, and tax relief. 4 years of the Doug Ford PCs, they're just emulating the McGuinty Wind Liberals before them and doing their best to transform into the provincial wing of Justin Trudeau's Federal Liberal Party of Canada. These are the things they don't want us to talk about. They don't want us on the stage to debate them, because on the stage today, Ezra, all they're going to do is rush to see who's going to copy Justin Trudeau the fastest.
Yeah. About half an hour ago, Sheila Gunn Reid and I were looking at the polling by region, and there are some parts of Ontario where, quote, the other party is polling double digits. None of those, quote, other parties were invited to be on the stage. Let me invite my friend Sheila to put any questions to you. Albertans have some experience with parties on the right and some of the criticisms of splitism. Sheila, do you have any questions along those lines or on any lines for Jim Karahalios?
Sure. Jim, I was just looking through some of the data, and it shows that back in 2018, I think only 1% of voters voted for other parties. I guess you would be lumped into that. But now in some ridings, it's as high as 10%, or at least some regions. So where are you seeing those regions? Like, where are you seeing the biggest gains for New Blue?
New Blue is largely that entire other on its own. There's really no other option that you're talking about. And especially if you look at those numbers from some of those establishment pollsters that have done their best to pretend like we don't exist for 2 years, those numbers are highest in the Cambridge, Kitchener, Brant region, and spreading out beyond there in southwestern Ontario. It's no surprise that's right where Belinda Karahalios is in the riding of Cambridge, up for re-election. She's and I'm running in Kitchener-Conestoga, just next door, and she's out there canvassing every day, and her team's hard at work, and she's outworking the opposition. There's more Belinda lawn signs in Cambridge than any of the other parties. So it's no surprise that the other, which is really the New Blue Party of Ontario, is already in double digits from establishment pollsters. And we know from on the ground that Belinda's right now leading and's got a great chance to get reelected. But we need the help of people throughout Ontario to reach out, get in contact with their New Blue Party candidate in their riding, and get those signs up and help canvass. And a grassroots message is the way that we're going to get the New Blue Party of Ontario message out, and the new blueprint, which is our party platform.
All right, Jim, great to see you. Thanks for joining us, and good luck. Even though you're not inside the debates, I'm glad you're there on the outside making your presence known. Jim Karahalios, leader of the New Blue Party. All right, well, we are still about 10 minutes away from the official event. Let me see if we have other guests on deck. I understand that Suan Levy, the great longtime Toronto Sun writer who now works with True North, is someone we're trying to wrestle and wrangle. Thanks and congratulations to our team in the control room working live TV to have such a strong pregame lineup. Sheila, when I listen to Derek Sloan and I listen to Jim Karahalios, I can't help but see the similarities in so many of the things they're saying. And they each have their MPP. In Jim's case, it's his wife, Belinda. In the case of Derek Sloan, it's Mr. Nichols, both of whom defected away from the Ontario PCs. I find it frustrating that they haven't been able to fuse what I think are 90% similar parties. I mean, I think it's a personality dispute.
Yeah, but that's the problem with conservatives, right? We're individualists by nature. We're sort of prickly by nature. And the kind of people who end up standing on principle and getting themselves thrown out of a party, what makes them great is also what makes them hard to work with in groups. And
Right.
So at some point, I think, and we saw it happen here in Alberta, people might have to just decide to set aside those 8 or 9 or 10% worth of differences for the good of the province.
Yeah, I think you're right. And look, we saw it with Maxime Bernier, that even he himself was not able to punch through. I think that it'll be a challenge for both of these parties to hold the seat they have. And maybe the loss of that will cause the membership to force things together. I just wish that there were some truly conservative alternative in Ontario. And just like people always said, well, Ezra, federally, the answer is Maxime Bernier. Well, sure it is. But he did not have a credible chance of winning. And I know there was some hope. There were some polls in the last election that briefly showed he was going to maybe punch through in a few ridings. It didn't happen. And I think the likelihood that either of these parties is going to punch through in even one riding, I just don't think it's going to happen. I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer. I'm just saying the math is the math, and I just don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, it's disappointing. Again, in Alberta, we were delivered to the NDP because of a vote split on the Conservative side. And so I think it took new leadership for both parties to set aside the hard feelings and get everybody to come back to the table and sort of purge out some of the red Tories ran off to other parties. That's great. But that's just the way it is. That's the way our parliamentary system works, where there's two progressive parties and one conservative party. And, that's usually just how it has to be. And sometimes the party, as we know in Alberta, but also federally with the reform, sometimes it has to split completely apart, and you go through 4 or several more years of suffering before you figure out how to bring things back together.
Yeah, once every other alternative fails, maybe people come back to the one remaining alternative. Well, I'm delighted to introduce to our viewers now a dear friend, Suan Levy, one of the most beloved columnists for many years and reporters at the Toronto Sun, and now a star with True North. Great to see you, Suan. I'm here with our friend Sheila Gunn-Reid, who's on our western flank. How are you, and what do you think of the provincial election in Ontario so far?
A big yawn, Ezra. Oh, by the way, I like the facial hair. You look very distinguished.
I think you're the only person who's said that, so I thank you.
I said you look like Moses. I thought it looked good.
Yeah, Maimonides.
I just don't have the manpower. I'm not quite masculine enough to pull it off. But listen, thank you for the compliment. Okay, you say it's a yawn election, and I think that means maybe there's not that much difference between the parties, or why is it a yawn election in your mind?
Because I think for two reasons. I think that Doug Ford did well enough that people are content they got through COVID. I think he has moved further to the middle, sort of center left, in which in some cases I don't like. I think he's been extremely woke and on the education file, and I don't think he's actually properly apologized for what happened in long-term care. I think that was an abysmal disaster. I spent most of my last year at Post Media covering that, and I think but people don't care about the elderly. That's the problem. So on the education file, he's kept enough people happy with his sign on to the woke ideology, which is not good for the Conservative brand as far as I'm concerned. As far as Stephen Del Duca, I think he's yesterday's man. I think he identifies too much with Kathleen Wynne. He was part of her caucus, and I don't think people have forgotten about that. I don't think he has any fresh ideas. I found his ideas very uncreative, very close to the NDP. He's battling for the far left with the NDP. And as for Andrea Horwath, I remember 4 years ago when I covered the election and tried to expose all her anti-Semitic and crazy candidates, and here she is again. She keeps losing elections, and they won't get rid of her. So there aren't very many choices, really, when it comes down to it.
Yeah, very frustrating. Well, and on top of that, you have at the city level in Toronto, John Tory looks like he's going to slouch towards another win as well. It's like fresh blood is needed, and where is it? Fresh ideas, fresh energy? I don't know. I find it a little bit disappointing. At the federal level, Sheila and I were talking about Pierre Poilievre. At least there's something new and controversial and interesting, and you could be for him or you could be against him, but there's some ideas there, whether it's his thoughts on inflation, the Bank of Canada, cryptocurrency, his phrase, make Canada the freest country. Like, there's a lot of things to sink your teeth into, and they're real things. We just don't, Ontario doesn't have that. I don't know why Ontario doesn't have that.
Yeah, it's actually very sad because I think everybody's battling for the center left, politically speaking, and you can see the response to Pierre Poilievre. I mean, I'm sure Sheila and I have exchanged Twitter responses with some of these crazies on the left who are trying to find anything they can with respect to Pierre Poilievre. He is a conservative. He is what I consider a traditional conservative. And what's wrong with that?
Yeah, I wish we had one in Ontario. Well, listen, Suan, it's great to have you. Thank you so much for joining us, and we admire your work. And we're going to break away now because the debate's about to start in a couple minutes, so we'll let you go. And Sheila and I will get ready because it's at the bottom of the hour is the official start time for the debate. So, Suan,
are you going to have to keep toothpicks in your eyes to keep them open?
Oh, big time.
Right.
Boring.
That's right. All right. Well, there it is. Our
Take
friend
care.
Suan Levy joining us via Skype. Well, Sheila, we have about 120 seconds before the debate starts. I think there's just no fresh ideas. Everyone is so.
No.
I don't know. I bet you it's going to be very low voter turnout. I think that perhaps they could have had a higher voter turnout if one of the parties stood for something. I see, though, out of the corner of my eye, we're going to try and jam him in before the debate starts. Rick Hillier, member of the provincial parliament.
Randy.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I said
Randy.
Rick Hillier. Randy Hillier. Oh, my goodness. Forgive me.
Oh, great.
Randy Hillier, great
Randy.
to see you.
Good to see you.
You know what? I misspoke there, but it's a pleasure to have you. We only have about a minute before the debate starts, but give us your thoughts on someone who was elected as an Ontario PC, got off sides with the Premier, and, went down in a blaze of glory, fighting for freedom. Tell us your thoughts.
Well, listen, I would say that the people of Ontario have no choices on this debate tonight. The only parties that are being permitted to speak tonight are the parties that have demonstrated they have no regard for our Constitution or our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. We have they call it a consortium, but it's more a cabal, much like Twitter and Facebook, that prevents any dissenting views from being offered up as a choice for the people of Ontario to, and you've mentioned this on your show tonight, they have a set of rules that indicated who would be permitted to be involved in the debate. They kept changing how they were going to apply those rules, and we are left with the uniparty, the four parties that all disregard our Constitution and our Charter of Rights and Freedoms being offered.
Yeah, we don't even hear the word freedom used a lot by a politician of any party. Sheila, do you have any questions for Randy?
What are you expecting tonight from the debate moderators?
Well, Steve Paikin is a very professional and competent journalist. I think he'll do a much better job than what we've seen in the federal debates. Steve Paikin is a very exceptionally knowledgeable individual on Ontario politics. So I think he'll handle himself well. He'll probably be the smartest person and most knowledgeable person involved in the debate tonight. Certainly far better than the four leadership contenders.
Randy, I got to jump in because they're starting, and I don't mean to cut you off, but I don't want to miss it. Thank you for joining us. We're going to say goodbye because we got to go to the debate. We'll talk to you soon, Randy. Everybody, stand by for the TVO debate.
We're going to begin tonight with a 1-minute opening statement. Mr. Ford, please start us off.
Well, good evening. It's a pleasure to be here tonight, and thank you for joining us. Friends, I'm excited about the future of Ontario, but it's up to each of us to roll up our sleeves and get it done. We're the only party with a plan to cut through the excuses. We're the only party saying yes. We're saying yes to rebuilding our economy with better jobs and bigger paychecks. Yes to building highways and key infrastructure like 413 and the Bradford bypass. We're saying yes to keeping costs down and putting more money back into your pockets. We've already scrapped the license fees, and we scrapped the tolls, and we're cutting the gas tax. We're saying yes for working for workers by getting more people in the skilled trades and manufacturing. And we're saying yes to keeping our economy and our province open today and for the future. Friends, let's say yes, let's get it done.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. Ms. Horvath.
Thanks. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm sure this is not the most fun thing you'll ever do on a Monday night, but because you're joining us, it shows that that you care and that this election has a lot at stake. So my message to you tonight is a pretty simple one. There's hope. There's hope that together we can fix the things that matter most to you. We can make sure our healthcare system is there when you need it and that we clear the backlogs and get people's wait lists down. We can fix long-term care, get the care back in and the profits out. We can make sure everybody has a decent job, a job that actually pays the bills. And we can make sure that the affordability of housing and all of the other essentials are taken care of. We have a chance to do that this time around, and regardless of the last couple of governments, I know that together we can certainly make it happen. Take care of what matters to you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Horvath. Mr. Schreiner.
Althea and Steve, thank you for moderating tonight, and thank all of you for joining us. It is now or never to address the climate crisis. And that's why we need to stop Mr. Ford from paving over our future. We need affordable homes, not expensive highways that will primarily benefit a few wealthy land speculators and make life more expensive for the rest of us. We need to stop the license plate gimmicks supported by the NDP and Liberals that will drain billions from healthcare, education, and housing. We need new solutions to old problems so we can build a caring, connected, affordable, climate-ready Ontario, the kind of Ontario that protects the people and places we love in this province. We can act now to build the future you want. And that's what Ontario Green MPPs are ready to provide the leadership at Queen's Park.
Thank you, Mr. Schreiner. Mr. Del Duca.
Well, thanks very much. Good evening, Ontario. Thank you so much for tuning in. The past 4 years have been really, really tough. And while I know Ontarians are strong and resilient, so many are still suffering in this province. You think about students forced to learn through screens, being isolated from their friends, seniors who are so concerned about ending up in for-profit long-term care, and the cost of everything going up for virtually everybody. Let's face it, the Ford Conservatives have walked away from their responsibility to lead and left you to fend for yourselves. And that's not good enough. Right now, they want to build a $10 billion highway, the 413. It's going to make a few of their donors wealthier. It's not going to do anything for you. Tonight, I'm going to focus on the Ontario Liberal plan to make your life more affordable if you're buying meals, taking public transit, or paying your rent. We're going to protect our seniors at all costs. We're going to bring back an optional grade 13, and we're going to repair our schools. There's a choice in this election. Let's make our province truly a place to grow.
Thank you, Mr. Del Duca.
Just before we dive into questions, a quick word about format here. There are 4 main subject areas for debate tonight. The leaders will each have the chance to state their positions on the question, and then we're going to have one-on-one debate, followed by an open debate among the 4 of you. Now, Althea and I have been asked to enforce the rules, which means, leaders, you've got to stick to the allotted time that you've been given, and you can't all yell at each other all at the same time. They will cut the mics in the control room if you do that. That's the one complaint I hear from people more often than anything else. There are people timing each of you in the control room, so we will do our best to make sure that everybody gets equal time.
The leaders were asked not to bring cheat sheets, props, or briefing books so that this could be an unscripted conversation. Again, the speaking order was determined by a random draw, and the first theme tonight is the economy.
Every poll, leaders in this campaign, says that affordability is the top concern of voters. So let's start with something simple. What would you do to make life more affordable for Ontarians? Ms. Horvath, you got the first 45 on this.
Thanks, Steve. It's certainly an issue that I keep hearing about no matter where I go in Ontario. People are very worried about what the future holds. Young people are giving up hope that they'll ever buy their own home. Renters are worried about the cost of rents going up. Everyday folks in this province should be able to afford everyday life. And so our plan does a lot of things to help with that. Not only make sure that we address rent controls in this province and make sure people can afford afford to buy their own homes, but also relieve some of the expenditures that people now are paying out of their pocket. We'll also be making sure we have a $20 minimum wage in this province, getting gas prices into a place where people can afford them by getting
Ms.
the...
Horvath, thank you.
Okay, I'm
Lots
sorry.
of time
Thank
to pick
you.
up on this in a moment. Stephen Del
Absolutely.
Duca, you're next.
This is such an important point. You know, every single Saturday morning I go out to the local grocery store and buy the groceries for my household. So the prices that you see going up in your day-to-day lives, that's something that everyone across this province experiences. Earlier today, standing with members of the new Ontario Liberal team, I signed the affordability pledge that we put forward. 19 specific ideas that will save you real money and make your life easier and more affordable. For example, buck a ride province-wide, $1 transit fares right across this province for municipal and for provincial transit systems. We're going to take 8% off prepared meals under $20, and we're going to give our most vulnerable seniors a $1,000 top-up on their old age security pension while we bring back rent control. These are just some of the ideas in our plan.
Very good. Mr. Ford, you're up next.
Well, thank you so much. You know, the economy means absolutely everything in this election. Folks, you're going to have a clear choice. You're going to vote for parties, all three of them, that want to hike your taxes, bring back the license plate stickers, and increase the gas tax. All three of them want to do that. I'm cutting the gas tax. I'm getting rid of the license plate stickers, and we're getting rid of the Del Duca wind tolls that they put on. We're going to make sure our economy thrives. Under the previous government, we had lost 300,000 jobs. We have gained 550,000 jobs with 338,000 in the waiting. We brought back the auto sector. We're going to be the capital of electric vehicles anywhere in North America.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ford. That's the time right now. We'll have more time, obviously, to get into this. Mr. Schreiner, you're 45, please.
Yeah, affordability is the #1 concern people talk to me about, especially housing affordability, which has gotten so much worse under the current government. A whole generation of young people are wondering if they'll ever be able to afford to buy a home. That's why the Ontario Greens Masterclass Housing Affordability Strategy is about getting speculation out of the marketplace so first-time home buyers have a level playing field. You know what, Mr. Ford, if you want to make transportation affordable, people, let's get big oil out of people's pockets. You can save $2,000 a year driving an electric vehicle. So let's make it affordable for the average person to own them. And when it comes to food prices, why would we pave over the farmland that feeds us? Let's grow food locally and let's make it affordable for people at the grocery stores.
Thanks, Mr. Schreiner. The format now calls for direct one-on-one debate between two of you, and then we'll do the same thing again with another two of you in a moment. Stephen Del Duca and Doug Ford are in this first round. Mr. Del Duca, what do you think of his plan?
Well, first of all, I heard Mr. Ford speak just a moment ago. Again, it sounds like he's reading the script from 4 years ago, trying to fight the 2018 election all over again. Ontarians face new challenges in part because he's walked away from his responsibility to lead, and new challenges, of course, because of COVID. We are in the midst of an affordability crisis, which is exactly the opposite of what Mr. Ford and his team said they would solve 4 years ago. That's why earlier today, I signed the 19-point affordability pledge for you. It's going to bring down the cost of transit. It's going to bring back rent control. We're going to boost the minimum wage and build in a real living wage. We're going to help seniors. We're going to do all of this and more in our fully costed and forward-looking plan. It's a plan you can count on. And slogans that you hear repeatedly coming from Mr. Ford and his team. People are hurting right now in this province, and Mr. Ford wants to act like he can skate right past that.
Okay,
like COVID never happened and the affordability crisis
Let's
doesn't
give him
exist.
a chance to respond. Mr. Ford.
Well, Mr. Del Duca, I just want to remind you, under yourself and the former Premier Kathleen Wynne, you destroyed this province. The economy was going downhill quicker than the Canadian bobsled team. It just continued going down. 300,000 jobs left this province. That's 300,000 people couldn't pay their rent, couldn't pay their mortgage, couldn't put food on the table because of your terrible policies. You want to bring back the license plate stickers as you did, and you raised it every single time. You want to increase the tolls like you did before on the 412 and 18. You actually, it was your tolls. So,
OntarioLiberal.ca.
And we're going to cut, Mr. Del Duca, we're going to cut the gas tax. You're all in favor of hiking the gas tax. You're in favor of the carbon tax. We aren't.
Oh my goodness.
We're the only the only party that's going to cut taxes, put more money back into your pockets. We're creating an economy that is thriving right now with 550,000 jobs and 338,000 in the waiting.
All right, Mr. Del Duca, a word,
yeah, look,
please.
you know, there's an old saying in life: you're entitled to your own opinion, but not your own facts, Mr. Ford. And the truth of the matter is, you need to stop reading the script that looks like it came out of the fiction section. The people of Ontario are fed up with your slogans and your empty words. They want real action. People watching at home, you can go to OntarioLiberal.ca. You can see the 19-point affordability pledge. We're going to slash the cost of public transit. We're going to make it easier for you to buy meals. We're going to make it easier for you to pay your rent. We're going to boost the minimum wage. This is a positive plan to make sure going forward you have what you need.
Last word,
not
Mr.
more
Ford,
empty
please.
words from
Mr.
Doug Ford and
Del
his
Duca,
team.
you said you want to do a buck a ride for the fares. 2 years ago, you were on the podium and you were saying it's dangerous to lower fares.
So why don't
do you know
support
why you're
my
saying
plan?
it's dangerous? Because
Why don't you
didn't
support my
build
plan?
any subways
Support
whatsoever.
we opened
We're
the subway
building
in
subways, the
Vaughan.
largest
Okay, friends,
infrastructure.
jumping in, that's our time for this
Total
round.
fiction.
That's
Total
our time.
fiction.
That's our time for this one-on-one. More to come, of course. We'll have another one-on-one now between Mike Schreiner and Andrea Horvath. And Mr. Schreiner, I think you get to go first. Take it away. What do you think of the NDP's plan?
Well, first of all, one of the affordability concerns that doesn't get talked about enough in this province is how the affordability crisis is affecting the most vulnerable. You know, Mr. Ford's license sticker gimmick disproportionately benefits households who can afford to own lots of cars. Doesn't do anything for a family that can't afford a car. The kind of family that might be on Ontario Disability Support Payments or Ontario Works, which Mr. Ford has frozen their rates. The Ontario Greens put forward a clear plan to double ODSP rates and Ontario Works so we don't force people to live in legislative poverty. And I'm happy that Ms. Horvath listened to the fact that we were fighting for the most vulnerable in this province and amended the NDP plan. I encourage these other two leaders to do the same, because nobody, when we're in a cost of living crisis in this province, should be forced to live in legislated poverty.
Right, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, Mike. And the best way to make sure that doesn't happen is by making sure that Mr. Ford doesn't get another term in office, because we've seen his record. There's no doubt that things were bad before Mr. Ford took office, but it's been 4 years and life's gotten harder for folks. It continues to get harder and harder. People are worried that their kids are going to have to move really far distances if they're ever going to be able to own their own home. But in most cases, we're seeing kids staying at home even longer in their parents' houses. And now that's not good for young people, and it sure isn't good for their parents, is what they tell me. So the cost of housing, getting rent control back into Ontario, getting the big oil companies under control by outlawing the gouging at the pumps, which we know is about to happen because there's a long weekend coming up. There's a lot of things we can do to relieve the pressure,
Okay, Mr. Schreiner,
but we
you wanna
have
come
to
back
make
on that?
sure that Mr. Ford is not reelected first.
When I knock on doors in this province, I don't care where I go in this province, housing affordability is the #1 issue people talk about. A whole generation are wondering if they'll ever be able to own a home. So many people not being able to afford their rent. That's why I'm so proud the Ontario Greens put forward what some have described as a masterclass plan in delivering the housing solutions we need in Ontario. Driving out rampant speculation, because homes should be for people, not speculators. Building more supply without paving over the farmland that feeds us.
Yeah, I want to give Ms. Horvath a chance to comment on some of these things as well.
And I'm happy that Ms. Horvath has amended her platform 3 times now to keep up with us on housing.
Ms. Horvath.
Well, again, the very most important thing is to get a chance to actually relieve the pressure on people and families. And so there's no doubt that Mr. Ford's cuts are only going to hurt more. We need to elect a government that's going to take care of the affordability of life here.
Okay, thank you, you too. Althea.
That wraps up the first one-on-one segment. So I'll next ask a question. You'll have 45 seconds each to answer, and then we'll open it up to open debate. The cost of building the proposed Highway 413 running through the Peel, York, and Halton regions is pegged at $10 billion. Is building a new highway the best way to spend $10 billion? And Mr. Schreiner, you can begin.
Absolutely no. The $10 billion for the Highway 413 is fiscally irresponsible. It's a climate disaster. It will pave over 2,000 acres of farmland. Mr. Ford, do you understand the food and farming sector contributes $50 billion to Ontario's economy and over 800,000 jobs? Why would you put those jobs and that prosperity at risk to save commuters 30 seconds? We need affordable homes, not long, soul-crushing, expensive commutes. We should not be forcing families to drive until they qualify for a mortgage. Let's build livable, affordable, connected communities where people can live, work, and play close to home and close to the people they love.
Thank you very much. Mr. Del Duca.
So first of all, I said this in my opening remarks this evening. Highway 413 makes no sense whatsoever. It's $10 billion of your money, my money, Ontario's money that's going to be spent recklessly if Doug Ford and his team have their way. It's not going to help you at all. It's actually going to make some of his richest political donors even richer. I'm the only person on this stage tonight whose community is directly impacted because this proposed highway will run through parts of my hometown of Vaughan. I'm also the person who several years ago, when I was serving as Minister of Transportation at that time, saw that this was a mistake, a colossal mistake that you don't need. I stopped it the first time. Doug Ford and his team brought it back for the wrong reason. If I'm elected Premier in a few weeks, I will stop it once and for all and invest that money in building new schools and repairing schools everywhere.
Thank you very much, Mr. Del Duca. Ms. Horvath.
Thanks very much. For some time now, the NDP has been clearly stating our opposition to the 413 and the Bradford bypass, and we're going to stick with that position. We're not going to flip-flop, as Mr. Del Duca has done, because the 413 is the wrong thing to do. It paves over farmland, it paves over the Greenbelt, it takes chunks out of the Holland Marsh, and what we don't need is more massive highways to mansions that nobody can afford. We need to make sure housing is available, starter housing particularly in communities across our province, and my question to Mr. Ford is, why are your developer buddies more important than making sure people can have homes that they can actually afford in their communities?
Thank you very much, Ms. Horvath. Mr. Ford.
Well, the question is, it's costing us tens of billions of dollars a year being stuck in traffic. And the people in Vaughan, in Caledon, in Brampton, they want the 413. Matter of fact, Mr. Del Duca, it was one of your candidates that went out there and they're promoting the 413. So I'm not too sure if you're agreeing with your candidate when they said the 413 or not.
Check with the council.
Folks, we have 2.5 million people coming to this province over the next few years. We need places for them, number one, to live. We need transportation to get from one point of the province to another, making sure goods are flowing. But you're going to save a half an hour each way. That's an hour that you get to spend with your family. We are going to build the 413, the Bradford bypass, and many other highways.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ford. And now we'll kick it off for open debate. And perhaps this would be a good time to talk about housing affordability as well. Mr. Del Duca, you get the first word.
Sure, fantastic. Thanks so much. So a couple of things. One is I'm not sure where Ms. Horvath got the issue regarding flip-flopping. I've been very clear on this since my time as Minister of Transportation all the way through. Here's an interesting thing Mr. Ford likes to ignore. Most of the municipal councils in the affected communities have now changed their position on his reckless highway. I'll also point out that the independent panel that I struck to review that highway many years ago actually reported, as Mr. Schreiner said earlier, that only a small handful of commuters would save literally seconds. Here's what an Ontario Liberal government will do with your money, those $10 billion. We're going to build 200 new schools across this province and repair 4,500 others. We're going to make sure that windows in your kids' classroom can open and close.
Del Duca,
we're going to make sure that the air that your kids breathe, my kids and your kids breathe, the air that your kids and my kids,
Mr. Del Duca.
Respectfully, if I could just finish my sentence,
the school backlog of repairs was $15.8 billion.
We're going to build 200 new schools and 4,500 schools that will be repaired. And I'll also just point out, as has been said by others so far, that we have a plan to slash transit fares down to $1. That's going to take an estimated 400,000 cars off our roads, a much better investment for you at home than Doug Ford's reckless Highway 413.
So okay, thank you. Talk a little bit about rent controls. I think that was your question, was it not, about rent controls?
Housing affordability.
Housing affordability. Well, so here we are in 2022, and Rent controls came off under the Harris government. And then, of course, unfortunately and disappointingly, 15 years in office, and the Liberals didn't choose to bring them back.
We did.
And now we see what's happening. We have a situation where renters are getting increases of like 30 and 40%. How can anybody be expected to come up with that kind of money? So yes, rent controls will come back under an NDP government. They should have never been taken off, nor should it have been a status quo with the Liberal government. But there's more to it than that. There are everyday expenses that people need to be able to afford, and people need a wage that you can pay the bills on. Mr. Ford took $6,000 out of minimum wage workers' pockets, and now he has Bill 124, a low-wage policy that not only affects workers in the public sector, but now it's spreading into the private sector. Well, and people are on strike for good wages because Mr. Ford's buddies figured out that he's setting a stage for a low-wage economy. And so we have LaUNA on strike. We have carpenters on strike. We have drywallers on strike.
Let Mr. Ford come in because he wanted to address your point.
Economy, Mr. Ford.
You know something, I appreciate your comments, but they're totally inaccurate. We're the only government. We had more housing starts than we've ever seen in 30 years. We've had more rental starts than we've ever seen in 30 years. You know, Ms. Horvath and Mr. Del Duca and Mr. Schreiner, I'm the only one that wants to build.
Story.
There isn't any building or any building development that you aren't against.
The question is, who do you want to build for?
Absolutely.
You don't want to build for hardworking families in this province. You want to line the pockets of your political donors.
You want to talk about the hardworking men and women that build?
Let him finish.
You know, Ms. Horvath, for years, the union supported you. Well, guess what? The Boilermakers don't support you. LaUNA doesn't support you anymore, and the electrical workers don't support you. You've lost touch. You're out of touch with the hardworking men and women.
I think you need to look in the mirror, Mr. Ford.
When the trade unions are supporting us for the first time, they know we're going to get it done, and we're going to spend money on infrastructure. That's why they're supporting us. They don't believe in you any longer.
In it for his
I think I need a little time here. Mr. Ford says he wants to build. His own budget predicts that housing starts this year will actually be 13,000 homes less than last year.
Exactly.
What he wants to build is he wants to build a fiscally and environmentally reckless highway. Not only is this highway 413 and Bradford bypass bad enough, but then he rerouted the highway just to be able to support a few additional land speculators who are going to get even wealthier off of this highway, putting it through a more even reckless environmentally path. The Bradford bypass. When a golf course donor said, hey, we don't want it through our golf course, he rerouted it around them. He will roll out the red carpets for the Amazons of the world and the big box stores of the world. But when it comes to supporting local farmers, he'll pave over their farmland, hurting our economy. When it comes to protecting us from flooding and the climate change, he'll pave over the wetlands that clean our drinking water and protect us.
Mr. Schreiner, if it was up to you and up to the three of you, you wouldn't build nothing. You would rather protest.
I'd build transit. I'd build housing.
I'd get the roads built.
I'd build public infrastructure. I'd build schools.
I just want to be clear.
I'd build hospitals.
I just want to be clear. I want to be clear about something here this evening. 4 years ago, Doug Ford stood on a stage like this one. He looked into the camera and he said to the people of Ontario, if elected premier, he would make it cheaper and easier for you to buy a home. And since that point in time, the cost of a house in Ontario has climbed by nearly $500,000. The Ontario Liberal plan will build 1.5 million new homes, all forms of housing, right across this province over 10 years. We will bring back real rent control in this province to help renters. We're going to make sure that surplus provincial land gets unlocked, and everything that we sell on those lands will go to first-time home buyers who Doug Ford has abandoned for 4 straight years.
Mr. Del Duca, you say you want to make it affordable. You want to hike up the toll roads, which you did. You want to hike up the gas taxes. You're 100% for the carbon tax, which will be another 10 cents, which is a major issue. And you want to bring back the license plate stickers.
Thank you very much. We're going to cut it off there. Thank you very much. Nobody can understand you when you're all talking at the same time. We're going to change topics. Healthcare. As you know, health is the largest chunk of the Ontario provincial budget. Yet, patients continue to endure very long wait times. There are calls for more doctors, for more nurses, for more hospitals. How will you meet these needs? And are you opposed to the expansion of for-profit private healthcare delivery? Again, you have 45 seconds, and Mr. Del Duca, we'll begin with you.
Well, I suspect, like most Ontarians, I was shocked back in February when Doug Ford's handpicked health minister said that his government would actually relieve the surgical and diagnostic backlog, which is at an epic level right now, by inviting the private sector, private hospitals, those were the words that she used, to come in and help clear the surgical backlog. An Ontario Liberal government will focus on building up public health care. We'll clear the surgical and diagnostic backlog within 2 years by investing $1 billion in new money to make sure that our operating rooms are running 24/7 and on weekends and evenings, that MRIs and CT scans are also boosted. We're going to bring 100,000 new healthcare workers online within 6 years, and we're going to do it within the public system by scrapping Bill 124 and truly valuing our frontline healthcare workers.
Thank you very much. Ms. Horvath.
Thanks, Althea. You know, the backlogs in surgeries are really hurting people. I met a woman not too long ago who has a knee surgery. She has to have both her knees done, and she's on a long wait list. And she's at the point she can't even go up and down her stairs anymore. And now she's looking to see whether she can afford to buy a new home in this housing market. We do need to clear those surgical backlogs, but we know that our hospitals were on their knees prior to even Mr. Ford taking office. But then he started cutting in healthcare the minute he got elected, and then we had COVID. But privatization is not the answer. And New Democrats have always stood against privatization, notwithstanding that both Liberals and Conservatives brought privatization to home care and long-term care. We'll take it out.
Thank you very much. Mr. Schreiner.
The key to expanding healthcare capacity in this province and addressing the real wait times that people are experiencing is to invest in people. Nursing vacancies have doubled over the last 2 years. We're now short about 30,000 nurses. And when they're overworked, underpaid, and disrespected by their government through wage freezes, it's hard to recruit and retain nurses. So let's end the wage freezes that are wage cuts. Let's actually invest in ensuring that we have publicly funded, publicly delivered health care. Let's put people before profits when it comes to long-term care. And let's ensure that mental health is health by funding the mental health system we need through OHIP.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ford.
Well, when we came into office, our healthcare system was broken. You know, it was on the brink. It was already stretched to the max. And we inherited hallway healthcare, very, very clear, and everyone knows it. Our hospitals were crumbling for decades from a lack of investment. Even your Minister of Health said you starved the healthcare system. You stopped talking to the doctors. You know, we have a great relationship with the doctors and right across all healthcare workers, but we're investing back into healthcare with record numbers. We're investing over $40 billion in new hospitals, 50 projects right across every single region. We're hiring 8,000. We've already hired 8,600
Mr. Ford, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off, but you can continue talking about your record in the face-to-face. First, though, we'll go to Ms. Horvath and Mr. Del Duca. Ms. Horvath, you can kick us off.
Thanks so much. There's no doubt that our healthcare system is in a shambles, but it is that way because of years of squeezing hospitals by the Liberal government, and people deserved better than that. The hospitals were on their knees when COVID hit. The Liberal government gave us hallway medicine, but of course, Doug Ford's cuts just hurt more. They make things worse and not better. That's why we need to invest in our hospitals. We need to scrap Bill 124, make sure that we're respecting those healthcare workers who we call heroes and then we treat like dirt, Mr. Ford. So we need to do that. We also need to get internationally accredited nurses and doctors on the front lines on our healthcare system. I met a doctor not too long ago. She lives in she lives in Fort Erie, and she's accredited from somewhere else, from another part of the world. And in Ontario, in Fort Erie, she cannot practice as a doctor every day. She crosses the border to Buffalo and works as a doctor. So we need to fix a broken system that's been broken for a very long time, get people return and recruit and retain healthcare workers, treat them with respect, get rid of Bill 124, scrap Doug Ford's low-wage policy, and really start providing the kind of services that people need. With more funding, 24/7, we can clear the backlog of procedures.
So look, there's no doubt about the fact that there is a really, really brutal backlog that we have both in surgeries and diagnostics in this province right now. When I said in my opening remarks tonight, people are still struggling. That's why it's so important that there's a forward-looking and fully costed plan that will address those needs. This is not an abstract talking point for me. You know, a couple of years ago, respectfully, Ms. Horvath, a couple of years ago, my mom fell and broke her hip. And I have to tell you, though she got good care at the local hospital in York Region, it was so tough for our family and for her to navigate that system. It's only gotten worse over the past couple of years, talking about the surgical and diagnostic backlog. That's why the Ontario Liberal plan will invest $1 billion over 2 years so that we have MRIs and CT scans that are running full tilt, so that we have operating rooms that are operating on weekends, evenings, all the way through to clear that backlog. Because right now, if you need prostate surgery in this province, only 30% are able to get it on time. That's not good enough in a province like ours.
We
have to repeal Bill 124
for all kinds of procedures.
Again, Ms. Horvath, respectfully, we're not here tonight to fight the 2018 election all over again.
There are new
challenges facing people.
You left a wreck behind you, and you have to step up and take some responsibility for that, Mr. Del Duca.
There are new challenges
Where were you when all these decisions were being made? Were you out getting a coffee at the cabinet table?
Respectfully, there are new challenges facing Ontario because of how the Ford Conservatives walked away from their responsibility. I would rather that we would find a creative way to repeal Bill 124 to make sure internationally educated nurses and doctors are brought online.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
We're going to give Mr. Ford and Mr. Schreiner a chance to debate now. Mr. Ford, you may begin.
Well, as we're building the healthcare system and hiring thousands of doctors and nurses and PSWs, Mr. Del Duca, propped it up by the NDP and Ms. Horvath, you fired 1,600 nurses.
Why is
we're hiring thousands.
With you?
Mr. Del Duca.
Why is it private education and private healthcare with you all the time?
I know the truth really hurts, but you fired 1,600 nurses. Every region of this province, is getting a new hospital. There's 50 new projects happening right across this province. Yeah. We're also paying for the nurses' tuition fees and for their books if they serve in underserved areas. We're taking care of them. We made sure the nurses got a $5,000 retention pay, which is on the average 7.6% increase. We've given the PSWs $3 permanent increase. And that far exceeds what your government did, Mr. Del Duca, propped up by the NDP. We're building, we are actually building the healthcare system that we need for the future and hiring more nurses. We have 720 doctors coming online. That takes care of 750,000 patients. We're building a med school out in Brampton. We haven't seen a med school in decades, but we're building a med school to make sure that we get more doctors into the hospitals.
Forgetting about the Northern Ontario
Mr. Del Duca, you had your chance. Let's bring in Mr. Schreiner.
Mr. Ford, have you talked to a nurse lately? Exactly. Have you talked to a nurse about how disrespected they feel? How overworked and underpaid and underappreciated they are? How insulted they feel being called heroes and then essentially having their wages cut by having them frozen? Mr. Ford, if you want to build capacity in our healthcare system, you have to make sure you invest in the people who deliver that care. And nurses are the backbone. They deserve to have Bill 124 gone. They deserve to have the opportunity to negotiate fair wages and fair benefits. You know, even their mental health care benefits were frozen because their entire benefit package was frozen. Have you looked somebody in the eye who lost a loved one in long-term care and explained to them that $171 million of money drained out of our long-term care system into the private pockets of shareholders at a time when people were scrambling for PPE, when seniors were trying to get access to vaccines, when PSWs were desperate to have a little bit of support to care for people and save their lives? We are better than this as a province. We can put people and care before profits. That's what it means to have a publicly funded, publicly delivered, public healthcare system. Care, people first.
Do you want to have 5 seconds
Well,
left
I
to
have 5
respond?
seconds to respond. I don't know where you're getting your figures. We're building new hospitals. They want to work in a clean environment. There's hospitals that were 80 years old that were crumbling. They want to work in a clean environment, and we're building the hospitals
You need
to make
people
sure
to
they're
work in
taken
those
care of.
hospitals.
Thank you
Mr.
very
Ford.
much. Thanks
Nurses,
to all of you
doctors to work in the hospital.
Thank you.
Leaders, let's continue on the theme of healthcare here. And I want to ask you what the most important lesson you learned was as it relates to healthcare during the pandemic, which would improve things going forward now that you have that knowledge. We have brief opening statements and then four-way debate. Mr. Ford, you get the first kick at this.
Well, I'm going to answer your question straight up. That was the most challenging time of my entire life as Premier. And I don't wish that on any Premier or any administration in the future, as we inherited an absolute broken system in long-term care from multiple governments. It was a challenge. Did we get everything right? No, we didn't get everything right. But I'll tell you, every decision I made was with the best intention, with the best medical advice I could get at the time. But we're going to fix the system. We're fixing it right now until no other Premier, no other administration has to go through what we had to go through. You know, there were challenging times, but I'll tell you, I'll make sure that never happens again, ever.
Thanks, Mr. Ford. Mr. Schreiner.
We need to make sure that we're adequately prepared for the next crisis, whether that crisis is a pandemic, whether it's the climate emergency, whether it's some unknown crisis that's bearing down on us. And that means investing in people, making sure our care providers are adequately and fairly compensated. It's making sure that the most vulnerable are protected. You know, one of the reasons so many doctors say that we should be writing prescriptions for people for them to access housing or food is because the most vulnerable who don't have access to housing or food actually put the most pressure on our healthcare system and bore a disproportionate burden during the pandemic. We need to invest in them.
Thanks, Mr. Schreiner. Mr. Del Duca, you're up.
I think the most important lesson that every leader should have learned during COVID, in particular in healthcare, is that you have to follow the science. You do have to listen to the medical evidence, especially when you're dealing with a public health crisis. Now, everybody watching at home knows that in February 2021, when the science table told the Ford conservatives don't reopen so rapidly and they ignored it, that made subsequent waves of COVID dramatically worse for Ontario families. And then when he scrambled, he decided he wanted to close playgrounds and give police more powers for carding that bore no relation whatsoever to the challenge that we faced. Yes, we need to get to the bottom of why this province wasn't prepared for sure, but the way to go forward in a responsible and thoughtful way when you're dealing with healthcare crises is to listen to the science and follow it in a thoughtful way.
Andrea Horvath, your time.
Thanks. Whenever I think about what happened during the pandemic, I think about long-term care and the absolute tragedies that took place there. I think about people like Kathy Parks, who was traumatized by the death of her father in a private long-term care home, a for-profit long-term care home, who basically refused to give him the care that he needed. Lots of families watched as loved ones, as the armed forces showed us when they arrived, dying in long-term care homes of malnutrition and dehydration. Our seniors should have never gone through that, nor should our government have sued, had put a law forward so they couldn't sue and get justice to protect their buddies in private long-term care.
Thanks, Ms.
A lot
Horvath.
more to say about this.
Okay, we have 5 minutes now of open debate. Mike Schreiner, you get the first kick at it.
I want to talk about the fact that we need new solutions to old problems when it comes to our healthcare system. We need to invest in people, investing in the people who provide care, but also investing in the people who need that care. The biggest driver of stress on our healthcare system is actually poverty. It costs our province $33 billion a year. There are literally doctors and nurses saying we should be writing prescriptions to address poverty if we want to take pressure off of our healthcare system. Let's talk about housing. University Health Network says we should be writing prescriptions for housing because one of the biggest drivers of people going to hospital is they don't have safe or affordable housing. So let's talk about ways that we can prevent illness and promote health. by
do that right
investing in
Let's
people.
do that.
Yeah, sure.
1, 2, 3. Go ahead.
So as I was saying earlier, look, when you go through the kind of public health crisis that we have, in addition to listening to the science, you need to know that, as has been mentioned earlier, mixing the private sector and care, in particular elder care, is wrong. But we also see that with Doug Ford and his team and how they want to clear the surgical backlog. Our Ontario Liberal plan will invest $1 billion over 2 years to clear that backlog. We're going to bring on 100,000 new healthcare workers. We're going to repeal Bill 124 so nurses and personal support workers get the support and the compensation that they deserve to have. We'll continue to invest in physical buildings, including expanding community health centers, building 15 new CHCs right across the province of Ontario.
Ms. Horvath,
but
you
it really
okay with
does
all
boil
that?
down to public
You okay
versus
with all
private.
that, with this checklist?
Doug Ford, who prioritizes private all the
Here's what I
time.
think that we should be thinking about when it comes to our healthcare system. We saw what happened with COVID-19. We should have learned a long time ago that you can't squeeze hospitals. You can't fire 1,600 nurses like the Liberals had done. If I was in charge during the COVID-19 pandemic, I would have made sure people had paid sick days to prevent the virus from spreading. I would have taken care of the kids in schools, made the classrooms smaller to avoid the spread of back into community. I would have made sure that an iron ring was put around seniors in long-term care. How shameful that there was no protection for seniors in long-term care. And instead, this government protected their buddies by preventing them from being sued.
Let me get Mr. Ford to comment on that. Hang on, we should let him, you've made an allegation, we should let him respond to that. Mr. Ford.
I'll tell you, one of the biggest challenges when it first started was the PPE. Mr. Del Duca, you left the cupboards empty. I'll never forget it. Them calling me up and saying we have 5 days of PPE because the Liberals didn't restock it. And right away, I gave a shout out to industries, and within 2 days, 26,000 companies came online on our portal. And now we'll never rely on any other jurisdiction, any other country in the world for PPE. 3M is manufacturing millions and millions of N95 masks. We have surgical masks, we have gowns, we have face shields.
Okay.
We have
Well,
everything that
Stephen
will
Del
never
Duca.
have to be in that position
Quick
ever
comment here.
again.
Hang on.
And Medline.
Stephen Del Duca first. Stephen Del Duca.
There was a criticism there. Look, there's no doubt in my mind the people of Ontario have an exceptional capacity to rise to the occasion of a challenge. But I want to understand better. I think people at home do as well. Why, when the science table told you in February 2021 to not reopen so rapidly, why did you choose to do so? And then why did you tell little kids like my own daughters that they couldn't go to playgrounds and that police should have more power to trample on charter rights indiscriminately? Why was that your solution in the midst of that moment of crisis? Why? Why then? Why
Mr.
then?
Del Duca, as I said earlier on, folks, was everything perfect? No, it wasn't perfect. But if there was an issue, I'll get up there. I made the change. I apologize. But
Playgrounds and
let's
police.
just talk about that
Playgrounds
for a minute,
and police.
Mr. Del Duca. For 2.5 years, literally 24/7, I was working on this pandemic. It's easy to sit back from the sidelines when you didn't have to make the tough decisions that I had to make and criticize. You have the easiest job if you just sit there and criticize.
Mr. Ford, respectfully, Mr. Ford, this is the job that you signed up for 4 years ago. You asked for people to support you 4 years ago. You ran to be premier. You must accept responsibility.
Very good. You've both made your points.
You've
both made your points.
At the core of the
Can I please have we need the last 25 seconds. Mr. Del Duca, Mr. Del Duca, please. Can I please? Excuse me. Can we please save 20 seconds for Andrea Horvath to respond?
So I did want to say that one of the things we have to acknowledge is that there's still a lot of people suffering from COVID in terms of mental health challenges, people that lost their businesses. Mr. Ford got the calls from Walmart and they did well, but small businesses lost a lot. People lost loved ones. We have to take care of folks' mental health in this province, and then we have a plan to do exactly that.
That's healthcare?
With mental health through your OHIP card, not
That's
your credit
healthcare.
card.
Now we got to talk education. The province's 2 million elementary and secondary students have been through an unprecedented last 2 years. I don't have to tell any of you. Can we get opening statements from the four of you on what you would do to improve education in Ontario? Opening statements, then we'll get into more debate. Mike Schreiner, you get to go first here.
We need stability and more investment in public education. I mean, our students have been through 2 tough years with the pandemic. But I want to remind everyone it's actually been 3 years of instability, because the year prior to the pandemic, Thank goodness students and educators fought back against Mr. Ford's efforts to increase class sizes and bring on mandatory learning. If the last 2 years have ever taught us anything, it's we need lower class sizes and no mandatory online learning. So let's make the investments to lower class sizes. Let's make the investments to ensure that our students learn in classroom. And let's make the investments to deal with the repair backlog. Mr. Ford wants to build a highway. Greens want to fix schools.
That's time. Doug Ford, your chance is next.
Well, the purpose of our education system to make sure we prepare the kids for the jobs when they get out of school, jobs of the future. And we change the curriculum to make sure that we focus on financial literacy until kids can understand how to create a budget, how to look at a mortgage. You know, we need real life and job skills when they get out until they have the upper hand. They have the best jobs and the best ability to go out there and fill those jobs. We're short 338,000 jobs right now because we've created the environment for the economy to be thriving right now. But we want to make sure that the kids understand the opportunities out there. And again, no matter if it's coding, mathematics, engineering,
Okay, Mr.
that's
Ford,
what we're focusing.
More time to discuss in a moment. Mr. Del Duca, your time.
There is perhaps no other place where Mr. Ford's record has been more appalling than in publicly funded education. This is not spin. This is not some sort of script that he's reading that someone else wrote for him. This hits my household directly because my daughters attend publicly funded schools in our home community. The Ontario Liberal plan will bring back an optional grade 13. We're going to shrink class sizes to 20 for elementary and secondary, hiring 10,000 new teachers to make that happen. We are going to cancel Highway 413, as we said, from day one. We're going to invest that in repairing and building new schools. 5,000 new special education professionals to help every child, yours and mine, be set up for success. Doug Ford does not value publicly funded education. Ontario Liberals do.
Thanks, Mr. Del Duca. Andrea Horvath.
Thanks very much, Steve. You know, the pandemic certainly was hard on kids and schools. I agree with what Mr. Schreiner has said. But let's face it, there were cuts to education before the pandemic hit. Mr. Ford was firing 10,000 teachers to the point it was so awful that kids were actually protesting outside of their own schools. There were 20,000 kids on the lawns of Queen's Park to try to save their public education system from this premier. And kids deserve so much better than that. What we've seen, of course, since COVID is a doubling down on the lack of commitment to public education. Kids are in classrooms with mittens on and coats in the wintertime. There's a repair backlog. We have to address all of those things and make sure our class sizes are smaller.
Thank you very much. Now we do one-on-one. This is Stephen Del Duca and Mike Schreiner's turn. So, gentlemen, over to you. You get the first word.
So, as I was saying just a moment ago, you know, when I think about what's taken place in my own household over the past 2 years, as my daughters, who are in grade 9 and grade 5, have struggled, like kids right across this province, forced to learn through screens. By the way, as was pointed out a second ago, Mr. Ford wants to continue with mandatory online learning. Ontario Liberals will get rid of that. They were isolated from their friends. Their teachers, their frontline education workers were not supported. And as has been pointed out, this unraveling and undermining by the Ford Conservatives of public education started shortly after taking office. And why? Why? Because time and time and time again, the Conservatives, including this version, under Doug Ford, want to emphasize private over public. Think about this for a moment. When schools like the school that my daughters attend were looking for rapid tests during COVID, we learned, as many public schools struggled to get those tests, that thousands of private schools were getting them with help from this government. That tells you all you need to know. Whether it's private hospitals or private schools, the Ford Conservatives cannot help themselves.
Let's hear from Mike Schreiner.
They want to privatize and put you and your families at risk.
Mr. Del Duca, let's hear from Mike Schreiner.
Yeah, absolutely. They want to put you and your families at risk. And the question is, you know, what have we learned from COVID? And I'm going to ask Mr. Del Duca what he's learned from when the last Liberal government was in power. The repair backlog got worse. Matter of fact, it got billions of dollars worse. 227 schools were closed, mostly in rural communities. In many of those communities, the school was like the lifeblood of the community, especially in those single school communities. Teachers' bargaining rights were taken away. They took the government to court and won. And so I'm wondering, Mr. Del Duca, have you learned from what the last Liberal government did to public education in Ontario. In the same way we need to learn, in the same way we need, give me a second, please. In the same way we need to learn from the pandemic, I believe the Liberals need to learn from the lack of investment they made in public education the last time they were in power.
Mr. Del Duca.
Very proud to respond to this particular question again, because this one hits home for me. Again, I'm not talking in an abstract way. This is not a key message for me or a script written by someone else. This is literally about Talia and Grace, my daughters, and the 2 million kids who attend publicly funded schools across Ontario. I think Mr. Schreiner and I, we share a lot in common on public education. Can I just say, in 2018, when Liberals left office, there were actually more public schools in the province of Ontario than there were in 2003 when Liberals first came to office. Regardless, because I'm not here to fight the 2018 election over again, because kids like mine face new challenges in this province. That's why Ontario Liberals will cap class sizes, bring back the optional grade 13, and repair schools by canceling
15
Highway
seconds for Mike Schreiner, please.
Yeah, the Ontario Greens will invest in public education. We will make the investments needed so your children thrive in public schools.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. We have our second one-on-one now, and it's Doug Ford against Andrea Horwath, or with Andrea Horwath, if you prefer. Mr. Ford, you get the first word.
Well, we're going to invest in jobs of the future, as I said. There's nothing more than a parent wants than their kids to graduate, get a good paying jobs, and thriving sectors right across this province that they never had under the Liberals and NDP. The Liberals and NDP closed 600 schools. That's 600 schools were closed across the province.
Just making it up.
We're building 100 new schools. We're investing over $14 billion in creating an environment for kids to go into brand new schools with the greatest technology and the HVAC systems. That's what we're focusing on. We're getting our kids ready for jobs of the future, no matter if it's in the tech sector or the auto sector, that we're going to need a lot of jobs in the auto sector.
Let's hear what Ms. Horwath has to say about that.
Thanks so much, Steve. One of the things that Mr. Ford refuses to acknowledge is the cuts and the chaos that he brought to our public education system. That's why we saw kids protesting at Queen's Park and outside of their schools. And now after COVID, we know that parents want quality, well-funded public education, not online learning that Mr. Ford can then privatize. We have parents who have told me stories, people have told me stories, that their kids have actually lost their spark, that their personalities have changed. So we need to get our class sizes smaller. We need more teachers. We need more supports in our schools to help those kids to get back to where they should be. We should be investing in public education because kids deserve to be able to find their gifts and excel and go on to build a great life in this province. Yes, there's one thing I agree with Mr. Ford. SHOP needs to be back in our schools, but it needs to be back in our public school system, not privatized so that your buddies can make some money off of it.
Mr. Ford?
Well, we've invested. I'm glad we're agreeing on skilled trades, even though any of the trade unions don't support Ms. Horwath because they don't believe in her. They don't believe in the Liberals. But we're investing $1 billion into the skilled trades, and we're starting in high school. It's absolutely critical that we get the kids involved at a very early age. And on the funding side, we're hiring 3,000 new teachers this year alone. We're increasing spending by $600 million, and we're up 9%.
This is their time.
And we're up 9% from when the Liberals were in power. But you know, folks, what I'm keyed on, making sure they have real life job skills when they get out of school, that they can find a good job, that they can find an affordable home,
and
live here and thrive.
What you're missing is the way that they get exactly that. The way that they get exactly that is by having teachers in the classroom and the one-on-one support that they need and the mental health supports that they need to come through, to recover, I guess I'm saying, from what happened during COVID. But your cuts and your chaos destabilized our education system significantly. And ask any parent and they'll tell you the same thing. You can't cut to a better education system. You just can't.
Okay, thank you very much. That's the end of this segment. Althea.
Still on education. In some parts of the province, violence in schools is on the rise, with students bringing in weapons. Education workers also report an alarming number of violent incidents directed at them. Sure. What will you do to improve school safety? And we'll begin with Ms. Horwath.
It's a really important question. I've been hearing a lot of heartbreaking stories around both of those pieces, violence in the schools and violence towards education workers. And we're not going to be able to fix what's broken in our schools with more cutbacks. We have to make the investments. We have to provide the supports. We have to make sure kids are able to get their needs met. I mean, we have a province that, I don't know how somebody does this, but this government promised they were going to help kids with autism and then pulled the rug out from under those families and doubled the wait list. We need resources in our schools. We need supports for our kids, and that will help us to ensure that our classrooms are safe and that they're safe workplaces also for education workers.
Thank you very much. Mr. Del Duca.
It's a really serious problem. The classrooms that I visited, the classrooms that I hear about, the classrooms that my daughters attend, it's not like a generation ago when I was growing up. So we need to make the right kind of investments. So for example, in the most recent Conservative budget, when Doug Ford chose to cut $1.3 billion at this stage out of public education, that was a reckless mistake. The Ontario Liberal plan will hire up 5,000 new special education professionals. That's more than one for every school in this province. 1,000 new mental health professionals to help target at-risk youth in our publicly funded schools. And we will cap class sizes at 20 in both elementary and secondary to give teachers the support and the space that they need to do their job.
Thank you very much, Mr. Del Duca. Mr. Ford.
Well, we're going to work with the whole community. That's where you go right down to the root cause. Work within the community, work within the schools, give these kids support that they haven't had. And Mr. Del Duca, you mentioned about mental health. Our government has spent more on mental health in schools than any other time in Ontario's history. We increased spending by 420%. That's a massive amount. We're investing $3.8 billion into mental health, but we're going to be there to support the kids. We're going to be there to support the families, to make sure they don't have these challenges in schools. We're going to make sure we invest the proper amount of money to help the schools and the families and the communities.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ford. Mr. Schreiner.
Yeah, I just don't see how cutting $1.3 billion from the education budget invests the kind of money we need to invest in schools. I've heard from so many teachers, and I've also heard from so many desperate parents whose children need support. That's why we need to increase funding for educational assistants and those who work with children with special needs. And I want to say to Mr. Ford, when it comes to mental health, 28,000 young kids on a mental health wait list in Ontario right now. Average wait time is 18 months. Sometimes it's as long as 2.5 years. I met a young person the other day who was on suicide watch and had to wait a year to get help. Ontario Greens will make a commitment to reduce those wait times to 30 days.
Thank you very much. We now move on to open debate. And Ms. Horvath, you can kick things off.
Thanks. This is something, of course, that we've also committed to, because it shouldn't be the case that young people can't get the mental health supports that they need. But that has been a long time problem in our province. I met a young person in Paris, Ontario, in the riding of Brant just last week. And he told me a heartbreaking story of being bullied at school and he didn't get the help that he needed. And he didn't get it as he was a teenager, and he didn't get into young adulthood. And 2 years ago, he attempted death by suicide. It was a heartbreaking story, and he talked to me about it because he wanted to be the voice of so many other people that are having that kind of mental health pain, and we need to address it. We need to make sure that we realize that mental health pain is just as serious as physical health pain, which is why we have a plan to get mental health services covered through your OHIP card, as I mentioned earlier. But cuts to education, my question to Mr. Ford is, who cuts education during a global pandemic? Apparently, Mr. Ford thinks that that's okay to do. And I think the rest of us disagree.
Let's give a chance to Mr. Ford to respond, and then the others.
Well, I'll just cut to the numbers, folks. Go online and look at our budget, and you can read our budget. That we're actually you'll find that they're misleading you. And you're going to find the facts are that we're spending 9% more, a $26 billion budget. We're actually investing $14 billion into new schools and building 100 new schools. But we're geared on making sure that we're preparing the kids for jobs of the future, no matter if it's the tech sector, as I said, or the automotive sector, or every single sector out there is hiring, because we've created the environment for the economy to thrive and prosper and grow. And when the economy thrives, prospers, and grows, so do communities. We're building new schools all over this province, folks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ford. Let's bring in Mr. Del Duca.
Kids out there to have the upper hand when they apply for jobs.
I said just a moment ago that classrooms today are an awful lot different from what they were like when I was younger, and I know from what Mr. Ford was younger. But when I listened to him talk tonight, and I listened to him talk about education over the past 4 years, it begs the question whether or not he's actually spoken to a teacher or a student or a parent outside of photo ops in schools.
Actually, I have.
Because if you have, you will hear about anxiety, mental health challenges, that feeling of abandonment, because you have cut, because you have undermined. But let me just also talk about post-secondary, the other part of education where there are serious mental health challenges too. When Mr. Ford came to office, he made it dramatically less accessible and far less affordable for young students to go to college or university in this province. Horribly backward economic policy. And yet he's here tonight bragging like he deserves a medal or a pat on the back about supporting public education. Your record on public education, Mr. Ford, is an embarrassment, and you should be ashamed of yourself for what you have done to kids across this province, like mine and the hundreds of thousands of others that just want a premier who understands that you have a moral obligation to get public health care right, and you, sir, have failed this province.
Mr. Ford, would you like to respond? And then we'll give Mr. Schreiner a chance.
Well, I'd love to respond. You know, I'm proud of our record on education. Matter of fact, I think we have the best Minister of Education we've ever had. He's invested billions of dollars to make sure he's getting the kids ready for jobs of the future. Under your administration, they didn't have to worry about jobs because you ran every single job out of the province. That's 300,000 jobs left under your watch. You want to talk about embarrassment? You destroyed this province in every area, no matter if the economy, hospitals, long-term care. You destroyed this province by the NDP.
Thank you very much. Mr. Schreiner, please come in.
If Mr. Ford's going to talk about the jobs of the future, then why is he so actively hostile about the jobs of the future? The bottom line is climate action is job action. Over the next decade, 65 million jobs will be created globally in the new climate economy, worth $26 trillion. Is Ontario going to lead that? Are we going to create those jobs? Or is Mr. Ford going to continue to be active hostile to them? For example, renewable energy. He canceled all the contracts. That's where most of the energy investment is going globally. Ontario can lead. When it comes to retrofitting our homes, he canceled all the programs to help people save money by saving energy, that we could ramp up jobs for people in the trades and building construction sectors. When it comes to supporting local food, he wants to pave over the farmland that's actually going to grow that local food. Let's invest in the jobs of tomorrow. The Ontario Greens have made a commitment. Free tuition for 60,000 young people to be trained up and receive apprenticeships in the fastest growing markets of the new climate economy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schreiner. Let's give the last word to Ms. Horvath.
I'm glad that that we're talking. You brought it back to education and started talking about what we need to do there. Under this government, we've had the only university that had to close its doors because he didn't want to fund them. That's a pretty shameful thing. We know that this government doesn't support public education. They don't support our post-secondary education system, and we have kids that are having debt the size of mortgages from their education. We can fix that.
Okay, thank you very much for this segment. We're moving on to the theme of leadership. In Ontario, across Canada and elsewhere, politics is becoming more divisive and confrontational. Hate crimes are rising. What should be done to address this? Why are you the leader to foster unity rather than division? Mr. Ford, we'll begin with you.
Well, I think in the past couple of years, if it's taught us anything, is leadership matters. And you know, during the pandemic, I had to work with 444 mayors and wardens that we got along very well. I had to work with 12 other premiers and a federal government of all different political stripes. But we all worked together. No matter if it was the pandemic or building the largest subway system anywhere in the country, or actually building electric arc furnaces in the Sault Ste. Marie and Hamilton in your own backyard that both of you voted against. That's like taking 1 million cars off the road. But we worked with the federal government. We worked with them to create a thriving auto sector in all different areas, no matter if it was Windsor or Oshawa or Oakville.
Mr. Ford, I'm sorry to cut you off, but you're out of time.
Okay.
Mr. Schreiner, your turn.
We absolutely have to address the rising levels of hate in our society and the rising levels of toxic hyperpartisanship in our politics. And that takes strong leadership. It takes leadership that's willing to work across party stripes to get it done. And I believe that's the kind of leadership that I've brought to Queen's Park and that Greens have brought to provinces across this country, whether it's in British Columbia or PEI. I helped lead the first bill in Ontario history that all 4 parties supported. And I am going to work hard in this next Parliament to ensure that we can get all 4 parties behind the Our London Family Act to combat Islamophobia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schreiner. Ms. Horvath.
Thanks very much. I agree on the Our London Family Act. I was really honored to work with the National Council of Canadian Muslims after that horrifying terrorist attack that happened in London. I don't know why the current government or why Mr. Ford's government decided not to support that legislation, but we need to take seriously the rising hate, the Islamophobia, the anti-Semitism, the anti-Black racism. We see too much hate in this province. That's why we pushed the last government to put in place the Anti-Racism Directorate. We're going to have a minister responsible for anti-racism, and we're going to do the work necessary to reduce the hate, reduce the toxicity, and try to give people a good life here in this province.
Thank you very much. Mr. Del Duca.
Well, thanks so much. One of the most important responsibilities that a premier has in our province is to work hard to unify all regions, all peoples, and frankly, even all political parties. During this pandemic, I tried my best to lead by example. I reached out to all 3 of the other party leaders on paid sick leave, on the vaccine certificates and mandates, and on dealing with what we saw in terms of the Omicron variant and how it was impacting our hospitals. I will say, Ms. Horvath and Mr. Schreiner and their teams participated. Every time Doug Ford and his team were invited to actually be collaborative with us, they chose not to. An Ontario Liberal government will pass the Our London Family Act. We will appoint a standalone minister for anti-racism, and we will work across party lines to deliver real progress for you.
Sorry to cut you off, but we are now entering the face-to-face between yourself and Ms. Horvath, and you can begin.
Well, thank you. I was just saying a second ago, I think it is so critically important to make sure that you do find creative ways to work across party lines. We saw some examples of that over the past 2 years. I will say that it was a missed opportunity that Mr. Ford and his team did not invite the opposition leaders into more discussions to play a constructive role. I think in my time as leader of the Ontario Liberal Party, there were 2 meetings that took place. I think we need to see more of that. I think about the climate crisis. Part of our plan is to make sure that if elected June 2nd, we will appoint a multi-party committee of cabinet on the climate crisis to make sure that we are prepared and to make sure that that issue, which truly must transcend partisanship, is actually dealt with in the most collaborative way. So bringing unity to the province, having a standalone anti-racism directorate or a minister responsible for the anti-racism directorate, and bringing people together is something that is core to Ontario Liberal values.
Thanks for the opportunity to respond to that a little bit. I spent a lot of time in the legislature when Mr. Del Duca's team was in office, and we tried very hard to get the Liberal government of the day to work with us to make bills better, but very rarely would we ever succeed in getting that level of collaboration. So it's great that Mr. Del Duca has seen the light as to how other parties can help make things better if they only welcome the conversation. But we have some serious problems in this province when it comes to division. And we were able to successfully get the Liberals to put the Anti-Racism Directorate in place, but Mr. Ford has defunded it for all intents and purposes. We need to be proactive. We need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to reduce the hate, to reduce the violence, and to make sure that people know that they're valued here, that they're welcome here, that we will protect them when nobody should go into a masjid, their mosque, mosque and have to look over their shoulder for fear that somebody's going to come in and start attacking people. Nobody should be worried. No woman should worry while she's walking down the street that somebody's going to tear her hijab off of her head. That's where things are at now. And in some ways, I think politicians have to be really, really careful about the role they play in fomenting hate and using dog whistle politics. It's really, really a problem. We should show that leadership.
Thank you, Ms. Horvath. Let Mr.
through our
Dilby
actions.
Yeah, if I can just say, it's actually worse than they defunded the anti-racism directorate, the Ford Conservatives. They actually took that responsibility and lumped it in with the minister responsible for Ontario's prisons, which is a horribly backward way to view dealing with the anti-racism directorate, in my estimation. I'll also say that when our national capital was under an illegal occupation, the second largest city in Ontario, it took Mr. Ford days before he spoke out against the divisive scenes that we all saw in this province when statues like the Terry Fox statue were being desecrated by anti-vaxxers. That's not the kind of leadership that brings Ontarians together.
Thank you very much. Mr. Schreiner and Mr. Ford, your turn. Mr. Schreiner, you can kick things off.
Two of the biggest challenges we face right now in Ontario is the rising levels of hate and white supremacy in this province. It's unacceptable, and we all have to be unified in speaking out against it. But we have to go further than words, and we have to turn them into actions. That's why I'm asking Mr. Ford, will you support the Our London Family Act? Will the next Parliament have 4 parties that will get behind an act to bring in action to combat Islamophobia? Will you admit that it was wrong to eliminate the anti-racism directorate, bring it back, and properly fund it so we have concrete action to combat rising levels of anti-Black racism, especially, and anti-Indigenous racism in our province? And when it comes to the climate crisis, will you stop dismantling climate action plans? Will you stop dismantling environmental protections that actually many of them brought in by previous Conservative governments? Will you actually restore the ability of independent science-based organizations in this province to protect people in the places we love, to adequately prepare us to be ready for the climate emergency that is bearing down on us right now?
Give him a chance to answer. Mr. Ford.
Well, Mr. Schreiner and my other 2 opponents here, make no mistake about it. We will not tolerate any racism of any kind in Ontario. Bottom line, full stop, you know it. We're actually putting millions of dollars of funding towards helping different communities in support to make sure outside of their mosque, they can have funds to have security there. But let me tell you something, Mr. Schreiner, there's a couple things we can agree on. You know, I'm not a big partisan guy. We get votes from the NDP, traditional NDP, Liberals, and PCs, and you're kind of the same. And what I like, at least Mr. Schreiner is honest and upfront. He says he's for higher taxes. He's for more regulations, and I just wish you would rub off on your other 2 colleagues because they're for higher taxes and they're for a lot of regulations. But you know something? What I did enjoy when we went to Medline and Guelph, we worked together, Mike. And you're that type of guy that you can put the political stripes behind you. We went out to Medline, a huge company out in Guelph. We cut the ribbon together. I can work with Mr. Schreiner. And I can work with all levels of government, all different political stripes, and I showed it to the country. And I have a great relationship with 12 other premiers, great relationship with the federal government, and a great relationship with 444 municipalities.
It's not about your relationship with other levels.
Oh, sorry.
But that's okay. That's your answer. And now Steve will take it.
Okay. and under the rubric of leadership here, I know there are people watching us right now, and I want to come at this from a fiscal point of view, because we've seen all your platforms, and you are all pledging to spend billions and billions more than what's coming into the Treasury in revenues in an extremely buoyant economic time. And my question, which I'm sure many people are wondering right now, is do any of you feel any obligation to be more prudent in your spending plans? Okay, 45 seconds each, then open debate. Andrea Horvath, you get to go first.
Thanks very much. I want to let the people of Ontario know that we will not raise taxes on middle income and low income families because we know that you're hurting. But what we will do is be responsible with the government's treasury and make sure that we're putting in place the things, fixing the things that are broken. That's the best way to say it. Fixing the things that are broken in this province, the things that matter most to you, like our healthcare system, like our long-term care system, like our education system, making sure people have good jobs that pay the bills. These are things that people need to know that a government is there for them to address. I stand with everyday people before elections, during elections, and after elections, and I will continue to do that.
Thanks, Ms. Horvath. Doug Ford, your turn now.
Well, unlike the other three parties, I'm a strong believer in putting money back into people's pockets until they can go out and spend it and stir up the economy. There's 550,000 more people paying taxes now than they were under the Liberals and NDP. We'd lost 300,000 jobs. We want more companies to come here. As I said earlier, when companies come here, everyone thrives and prospers. There's an opportunity to get a job in every single sector. I am a strong believer of getting better jobs and bigger paychecks, and that's what's happening right now. We're invested record amounts in infrastructure, $157 billion. We believe in building roads and building highways, building schools and hospitals to continue to make sure
Ford,
that
thank you.
Ontario
That's your time.
thrives.
Mike Schreiner, you're up next.
The COVID pandemic revealed the cracks in the foundation of Ontario, particularly our systems of care, and we can't simply pave over those cracks. We actually have to fix them. That's why we have to invest in people, in expanding hospital capacity, in putting people before profits in long-term care, in making sure that our education system is shored up. And so I won't raise taxes on low and middle income folks. Yeah, I'm going to ask wealthier people in this province to pay a bit more so we can have the funds to fix the foundation. And so we can prepare for the next crisis, which is the climate crisis. I mean, people in Kenora are being evacuated right now due to flooding. We're having all these extreme weather events. We have to be ready for them.
Okay, Mr. Del Duca, you're up next.
Well, thanks very much. Look, I said earlier tonight that this election is about a choice. Governing is also about choosing. The Ontario Liberal plan that we put out a number of days ago is fully costed. You can see that we use the same fiscal anchors that the Financial Accountability Officer used, that the Auditor General validated. We anticipate being able to responsibly balance Ontario's books by 2026. But here's the important caveat. I will never cut and deliver chaos and havoc in public education, public health care, economic dignity and support for small businesses, elder care, and the fight against the climate crisis the way that Doug Ford has. So I believe in balance, moderation, and responsibility, but I will lead on those topics to make sure you have
Mr. Del Duca,
a province that is a place to grow.
I'm going to suggest the following question to kick off this 5-minute debate period, which is leadership also means leading on the most existential issue of our time, which is climate change. And Mr. Ford, why don't you start off this 5-minute period with, do you think you've done enough to fight climate change?
Well, right now we're at 94% clean energy, but I'm never happy until we hit 100%. But what we're doing, we're investing billions of dollars into jobs, long-term jobs that people will be able to have an income. We're changing lives in Windsor and in Oshawa and right across this province by attracting $14 billion of investment into electric vehicles. We have critical minerals up in the north, be it the graphite and the cobalt and the nickel that's going to build these batteries. It's going to come down through the supply chain into Hamilton in your own backyard that you fought against, changing over from a coal plant to electric arc furnace.
You've made an allegation. Hang on.
Along with Sault Ste. Marie, that's like taking 1 billion cars off the
stand
roads.
by. You've made an allegation against her. We have to let her respond to it. Go ahead.
Well, I think Mr. Ford just has a penchant for making stuff up again. That's what he does over and over and over. But this is the premier that basically had a tantrum and tore out EV charging stations when he first took office. He tore up green energy contracts when he took office. Now he's seen the light, perhaps. I somehow doubt it. But what I can say is that New Democrats have a very strong program. It's called the Green New Democratic Deal. We'll get emissions down by 50% by 2030. By 2050, we'll have a zero carbon economy, and we'll do it by making great jobs that help with retrofits, having the first youth climate corps ever in North America, engaging young people in not only tree planting, but in mitigation.
Okay, let me get Mr. Del Duca to have a chance on this one.
Okay.
Too.
Yeah, thanks very much. I mean, this is such a huge topic for current and future generations. I do have to say on the clean energy piece, because Mr. Ford made a claim just a second ago, because he and his team have no plan to deal with Ontario's clean energy needs over the next few years, we anticipate that he will see, or under his leadership, there will be a 600% increase in fossil fuel burning fuel to produce Ontario's electricity in the next number of years. This is what happens when you have leadership that doesn't have the capacity to lead. And can I just say, earlier in the debate tonight, when we were talking about leadership, Mr. Ford talked about how hard he's been working. There's just one thing that I do want to put out there. Over the past 2 years, what we have seen in terms of Mr. Ford's attendance at question period has been appalling. More than 82% of the time set aside for him to respond to the opposition parties, he's been absent. Now, if you're watching at home and you don't show up for work 82% of the time, I suspect you don't get promoted. In fact, you don't keep your job. Same thing if you're in school and you don't show up 82% of the time. Only Mr. Ford
We've got to be fair here,
not
Mr.
show
Del
up
Duca.
and get rewarded.
We need to hear from Mr. Schreiner, and then Mr. Ford gets a chance to respond to that.
Thank you.
Let's be honest and let's be clear. The climate crisis is the biggest challenge we've ever faced. It's also a huge opportunity for Ontario to be a global leader in the new climate economy. But Mr. Ford, when he first came into office, dismantled all of Ontario's climate action plans. And then he started systematically dismantling environmental protections, many of them actually brought in by former Conservative governments, particularly Bill Davis. And he did it saying, oh, this is about cutting red tape. Well, I am sorry. Protecting people from flooding is not red tape. Protecting the farmland that feeds us is not red tape. Mr. Ford's plans to ramp up gas plants will increase climate pollution by 300% in Ontario, undermining all the hard work we did on the coal phase out. He wants to build electric vehicles, but he doesn't want the average person to be able to afford them. Our plan will make electric vehicles, new and used, and e-bikes available for people because it costs you $2,000 less a year to fill it up.
Okay, Mr. Schreiner, we need to give Mr. Ford a chance to respond to some of the comments that were made. Go ahead, please.
Well, I appreciate the compliments from all three of them. Mr. Del Duca, first of all, I can't believe the gall. You were the one in your party sold one of our crown jewels. You sold Ontario Hydro. Hydro won.
82%.
You know something? You drove up hydro rates to the highest rates in North America.
I'd like to respond.
You drove out 300,000 jobs.
Yeah.
We're creating more jobs, put more money back into people's pockets. All three of you are about hiking up gas prices. Gas prices. People can barely fill their tanks right now.
You're going
all
to
three of you
and defend
want to
big
jack
oil.
up the gas prices. I'm lowering the gas prices. I'm making sure that we're getting rid of the tolls that you put on.
A climate emergency.
And we're going to make sure we aren't bringing back that license plate sticker.
Jumping in for
again.
a second here, because you made an allegation against Mr. Del Duca, he needs to respond.
Yeah, look, I just have to say, Mr. Ford seems to be the only person on the stage that doesn't realize he's been premier for the past 4 years, because he continues to try to fight the 2018 election all over again. We know in Ontario today, many of you watching at home tonight are struggling. You are concerned about what's happening to your kids, to your parents and grandparents, to our environment, whether or not you're going to be able to ever afford a home. And Mr. Ford keeps dishing out empty words and slogans. By the way, slogans that other people write for him, instead of sharing what's in his heart and his head. And this is after he's been in the job for 4 years. When you don't show up for work 82% of the time, you lose your job. And tonight, Mr. Ford, you should lose yours on June 2nd, and you will lose yours on June 2nd.
Andrea Horvath, please. Last minute, Andrea.
I understand why you don't want to talk about the 2018 election, because you only retained 7 seats. And that's because you disappointed Ontarians. 15 years, and we had a sell-off of Hydro One. We had long-term care in an absolute mess. The gas plant sell-off, the gas plant scandal, rather.
5 seconds.
That's not leadership either, Mr. Del Duca.
Respectfully, Ms. Horvath.
That's not leadership either.
Respectfully, Ms. Horvath, every time you attack me, as you've done for a year, Doug Ford smiles. Progressives need real leadership.
Gotta go.
And that's what
Here's
we're
the thing,
offering.
friends, here we go. That's the end of the open debate here. We're going to try something a little different here before we go to closing statements, and that is, you've all had to make thousands of political decisions in your careers. I'd like to know which decision you regret the most. Mike Schreiner, you get to go first. 30 seconds here. Fire away.
Oh, my goodness. You know, I would say probably the one I regret was that I did not run in Guelph the first time I ran as leader. Even though it was a community I'd started a business in and had deep roots and a long-standing relationship with, I chose another riding to help out another one of our candidates. And that whole situation blew up in my face.
Thank you. Mr. Ford, decision you regret the most?
Well, it's probably similar to Mr. Schreiner's. I wish I would have run 4 years earlier. Then we wouldn't have to be dealing with all the mishaps that happened under the Liberal and NDP government. We'd be able to get so much further ahead, but right now, I would have to say that.
Mr. Del Duca.
You know, I think one of the things that's a challenge when you're serving in a government is that sometimes you don't always listen necessarily. I think this is true of every politician, every level of government. You don't always listen really closely, despite your best efforts, to what the people in your local community are telling you about whether they feel you're being responsive to their needs. It can be very easy to sort of fall into the trap of doing your best and not necessarily paying close attention. I think that was a really important lesson that I learned through 2018, which was not an easy year for me at a political or personal level. And that's something that stays with me as a lesson learned for going forward.
Thanks, Mr. Del Duca. Ms. Horvath.
Thanks, Steve. You know, my mom always taught me that if something goes wrong and you regret it, then you need to learn from it. You need to figure out why you regret it, why it didn't go the way that you want, and then do better. Learn from that mistake and do better. And I think a lot of parents told their kids that. And so I don't think about things in terms of regret. I think about things in terms of opportunity to learn and to do better for people the next time.
Thanks, leaders. Althea.
And now it's time for closing statements. And again, the order was decided by a draw. Ms. Horvath, we begin with you.
Thanks so much. It's been my pleasure to chat with folks tonight and to talk to the other leaders. And thank you both, Althea and Steve. This election has a lot at stake. And what we need to do to fulfill a lot of the opportunities that we talked about tonight, all of that starts with defeating Doug Ford's government. There's really only one shot at this point in time to do that, and that's with the NDP. So I'm asking people this time, come together under the NDP so we can defeat Doug Ford and start fixing the things that matter most to you.
Very much. Mr. Del Duca.
Well, thank you so much for tuning in tonight. I hope you've enjoyed this clash of ideas of the discussion about Ontario's future and where we go next. I said earlier tonight, I know that so many of you are struggling. I know that we are a strong and resilient people and we will get through this together. But I want you to know I love this province. It's where I've spent my whole life. It's where my wife and I, of course, are raising our daughters. And I want you to know that as Premier, I will work relentlessly for students, for seniors, for economic dignity, for a clean environment, for small business, and for our future. We will be a place to grow.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ford.
Well, tonight you heard very different visions of the future of Ontario. You'll have a very clear choice on Election Day. You can vote for any three of these parties, but I'll tell you, they're going to jack up your taxes like you've never seen, like they did before, and they're going to make life a lot more expensive. Or you can vote for the PCs that have a vision and have a plan to continue with prosperity throughout this whole province. Folks, I'm asking for your vote on June the 2nd. Let's get it done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. Mr. Schreiner.
We need a parliament that's going to meet the moment. We finally have a Green MPP at Queen's Park who's punched well above his weight over the last 4 years. And I need more Green MPPs from places like University Rosedale, Diane Sachs. By the way, Mr. Ford, you fired the wrong Environment Commissioner. I need people like Matt Richter in Parry Sound, Muskoka, because I wished I'd been there 4 years sooner. So we were more prepared for the crisis that's bearing down on us, the climate crisis.
Mr. Schreiner, thank you very much. That is our time. Thank you very much, candidates. Doug Ford, Andrea Horvath,
Appreciate it.
Stephen Del Duca, Mike Schreiner.
And a reminder, there are 10 days of advance polls starting May 19th, plus Election Day itself on June the 2nd. Go to the Elections Ontario website for more information on where and how to vote.
That's right. Please vote. And thanks, everybody, for watching, and good night.
Thanks,
Good night, everybody.
Well, how depressed are you How disappointed are you?
I'm bored stupid. I'm bored stupid. It was just a bunch of people. You know, you've got to be really bad, though, to make Doug Ford look reasonable. And he seemed remotely reasonable when you have everybody else around him wanting a $20 minimum wage, rent control, which disincentivizes the building of rental properties, an iron ring around grandma. I didn't make that phrase up. Kathleen or Horwath said it. And what's the other one? Oh, they're anti-highway for some reason. And who knew that license plate stickers were so controversial? I did not, but I guess they are.
You know, I called it. I mean, it wasn't a difficult call to make. When you've got a couple of government journalists on a government broadcaster talking to the government, you won't be surprised to hear, as Steve Paikin said, the existential issue of our time is global warming. Oh, I thought we were just on the existential. I mean, what's the crisis of the moment?
It was COVID, wasn't it? COVID?
Yeah, in fact, the Green Party accidental tourist guy said we have to prepare for the next crisis, the climate crisis. They love the crisis because it makes them more relevant. It makes politics more relevant. Journalists love a crisis. There's nothing worse than boring news. It gives power
to the government. Well, if you're a control freak that wants to go into government because you want to control other people's lives, crisis to crisis to crisis. You know, it was the climate change was going to kill us. Then climate change took a stand back because COVID came along, and then we didn't die of COVID. So we have to go back to pretending to be scared about climate change, because I don't think normal people are actually scared about climate change. I think they're told they need to be scared about it. So when pollsters call, they're like, yeah, I guess I'm scared. Yeah, it's the worst. But nobody actually cares about climate change.
You know, let me give a challenge to our friends in the control room. Earlier today, I saw the latest Abacus poll that ranked issues by concern for Canadians. Can you guys dig that up again, Olivia? Because the first 5 or so were all about inflation, cost of living, money.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until you were way down that you saw global warming. These folks were obsessed by it. I was thinking to myself, let me just say a few things. Steve Del Duca is just a liberal, but he's a big government liberal. It's sort of a very, very left-wing liberal. Andrea Horwath, professional loser. I don't know why they don't change. I mean, she just keeps on losing. I mean, how many times do you have to lose before your party says, okay, maybe we'll change things? But what about that Mike Schreiner?
The unblinking Green Party automaton?
Yeah. He said some weird things like, your road will destroy the $50 billion farm economy. No, it's just a road. He's not taking out every single farm. Like,
it's a highway.
It was sort of paving farms. I mean, I thought to myself, what did he add? Well, the answer is, other than the fact that he had a few expressions where he went insanely far, he really wasn't much different than the NDP or the Liberals, or for that matter, Doug Ford, who was cheering the end of coal and other fossil fuels. He brought nothing. He didn't change the debate. It was Steve Paikin who said global warming is the existential crisis of our time. That guy brought nothing, the Green Party guy, other than, maybe he's going to take a few votes away from the other parties on the left. But what would have happened had you had Jim Karahalios or Derek Sloan of these small right-wing parties? You would have had someone with a fundamental moral, ethical, political, ideological, philosophical objection to every item of consensus there. And in fact, say the premise of every question put by the two government journalists. So you would have actually had a real debate. You would actually have had a clash of ideas. And I'm not saying that Karahalios or Sloan would have won. I'm not saying they would have even done well, though I think they would have. I'm just saying it would have been a debate instead of a 6-way agree-a-thon.
Yeah, that's what it was. It was a bunch of people who were 3 people for sure, completely agreeing with each other. And Doug Ford saying, whoa, we'll get there.
Yeah.
Because Doug Ford didn't really have a lot different to say than anybody else. He just didn't like the pace at which they did it. And apparently he likes highways and license plate stickers. Yeah. That's really the only thing that he was different on. Even when they're talking about climate change and green energy, Doug Ford said, I won't be happy until we get to 100% green energy.
Yeah.
What in the hell?
Yeah.
Who said that's not a conservative viewpoint? That's actually one of the issues that swept Doug Ford into power was the cost of living and the cost of electricity. He didn't say job-destroying lockdowns. He didn't say the discriminatory vaccine passport. He didn't say giving Justin Trudeau basically permission to invoke the Emergencies Act was stomped on the rights to peacefully protest or, to be able to keep care and control of your assets without the government just confiscating them without trial. He said the thing that he regretted was that he didn't run for higher office sooner.
You know what? It's like that fake question. Tell me your weakness. My weakness is that I care too much.
I just try too hard.
Yeah, is I work too hard. I put the company first too often. I've really shown you my weakness, guys. Like, it's such a fake question. And the answer, well, my greatest mistake was I didn't bless you with my presence
with me
earlier. I apologize for not letting you bask in my awesomeness for 4 more years more than I have. Like, it's just such a dumb thing. But I mean, listen, it was a dumb question. Not as many dumb questions as Tom Clark had for the Conservative Party. No, we've got a couple clips here that I see Efron has clipped. 2 of them from Del Duca. Now, they were all atrocious. They really were. And they were whipping each other into a frenzy, 4 white dudes, whipping each other into a frenzy about how much hatred there is in Ontario. I think Ontario is probably the most welcoming place in the world for people of different backgrounds and ethnicities, and there's no barrier. The sky's the limit. If I was an immigrant listening to them denounce the raw hatred on the streets of this province, I would be terrified and not want to come here. But luckily, I would realize they're just self-hating white leftists who want to denounce performatively. But let me show a couple of clips.
Yeah, I've got comments about this.
Okay, well, why don't you jump in on the anti-hate stuff first, and then we'll go to Del Duca's comments about anti-vaxxers. So he, like, seconds after talking about we got to stamp out hate and division, he talks about those damn anti-vaxxers.
Those bastards.
Yeah. Why don't we throw to a quick clip of Del Duca using that phrase, anti-vaxxers, and how they desecrated the Terry Fox statue.
Yeah.
They defunded the anti-racism directorate, the Ford Conservatives. They actually took that responsibility and lumped it in with the minister responsible for Ontario's prisons, which is a horribly backward way to view dealing with the anti-racism directorate, in my estimation. I'll also say that when our national capital was under an illegal occupation, the second largest city in Ontario, it took Mr. Ford days before he spoke out against the divisive scenes that we all saw in this province when statues like the Terry Fox statue were being desecrated by anti-vaxxers. That's not the kind of leadership that brings Ontarians together.
Yeah, when are you going to stop the divisiveness of those goddamn anti-vaxxers? And desecrated was, I guess, putting a sign in the hand that said freedom.
Freedom. And that's a real neat thing for him to be worried about, is the desecration of Terry Fox. And I guess this leads into my comments about the clip that's coming up about the Islamophobia, anti-racism. You want to talk desecration? July 26th, Catholic Church in Sudbury, they beheaded the Virgin Mary and baby Jesus. Let's keep going. Oh, I'm kind of stuck on the interactive map that True North has. But there's a whole spate of church burnings and desecrations all across Ontario. Nobody has anything to say about it. All they're concerned about is Islamophobia, which, okay, let's be concerned about that too. But that's not where the crimes are happening. Churches were burned all across the country. Why are we funding, going in search of a problem that really doesn't actually exist?
You know, I think that the lack of a difference amongst all the candidates. I mean, really, Doug Ford didn't have anything to say differently. They've all agreed that Canada is the enemy. Canada has to be blamed. And Canada is a deeply racist and hateful place. It's out of control. It's just weird. It's this negative. It's talking down your own country. It's sort of funny. When I was in Ottawa with the Trucker Rebellion, I had never seen the Canadian flag being waved so earnestly by so many people, and the national anthem being sung spontaneously as like a meaningful hymn. And it did resonate with me that conservatives, populists, freedom lovers were using the national symbols. When I was a kid, Sheila, the liberals had subsumed those national symbols. Remember the 1995 referendum in Quebec almost separated? The symbol of the Liberals was the biggest Canadian flag you ever did see. They had Canadian flags. The sponsorship scandal was that they spent hundreds of millions of dollars putting Canadian flags everywhere in Quebec to try and shore up feelings of Canadianness.
Yeah.
The Liberals changed the national flag to be the same as their colors. The Liberals love every aspect of patriotic identity. Now they hate their country. They call their own country genocidal, Islamophobic. They throw in anti-Semitic because they feel they have to mention it in passing. They hate their own country. And it's just a reversal, because when I was a kid as a conservative, I was frustrated that the Liberals had sort of a moral ownership over all the symbols of patriotism. Not anymore. Liberals, including Doug Ford, hate our country.
Yeah, and you can see this in their jump to conclusions all the time. Anytime anything happens in and around near a mosque, it's absolutely hate crime. Doesn't matter. Don't wait for the facts to come out. I think it was Mississauga last month. Every politician around denounced somebody screaming something out the window at a mosque. Well, yeah, don't scream something out a window at a mosque. I think we're all in agreement with that. But it certainly wasn't a hate crime. It was local Muslim youth who did it. But every politician stood up and denounced it. Why? Because their first impulse is to think that this country is a really awful, intolerant place instead of a safe haven of freedom and liberty, or at least that it used to be.
Yeah. Same thing happened in BC. The Premier Horgan out there denounced some Islamophobia at a mosque, and it too, the suspect was Muslim. You're right. They just want proof. Demand for racism is so high it exceeds supply. I didn't like that part of the debate, as they were trying to outdo each other for you know, anyone who talks obsessively about anti-hatred, I think they're projecting a little bit. I don't know. I found the debate frustrating. There is no one there who I would want to vote for. No. They are all equally awful. Let's play one more Del Duca clip. He's talking about bringing back vaxes and mandates. Don't think for a second that Doug Ford wouldn't do that if the polls suggested to him it was the right thing to do. Can we play that next Del Duca clip?
No. I want to understand better. I think people at home do as well. Why, when the science table told you in February 2021 to not reopen so rapidly, why did you choose to do so? And then why did you tell little kids like my own daughters that they couldn't go to playgrounds and that police should have more power to card, trample on charter rights indiscriminately? Why was that your solution in the midst of that moment of crisis? Why? Why then? Why then?
Mr. Del Duca, as I said earlier on, folks, was everything perfect? No, it wasn't perfect. But if there was an issue, I'll get up there. I made the change. I apologize. But
playgrounds and
let's
police.
Just talk about that
Playgrounds
for a minute,
and police.
Mr. Del Duca. For 2.5 years, literally 24/7, I was working on this pandemic. It's easy to sit back from the sidelines when you didn't have to make the tough decisions that I had to make and criticize. You have the easiest job if you just sit there and criticize.
Mr. Ford, respectfully, Mr. Ford, respectfully, this is the job that you signed up for 4 years ago. You asked for people to support you 4 years ago. You ran to be premier. You must accept responsibility.
You know what?
Very good.
You both for Doug Ford to say that he worked the whole time. It's a bit of a laugh. I think the entire public sector had a giant staycation, and there were working people who worked during the lockdowns, but the government class.
Yeah, if Doug Ford didn't close their business on him, I guess the working people worked. But to listen to this guy say, you know what? So shoot me. I did my very best. Sorry, but Doug Ford doesn't have to live with the consequences of the things he did to other people. He destroyed their lives, and he's got very little liability in all of his decisions. He just says, well, I did my best. What do you want from me? But also, Del Duca, give me a break. The guy is complaining that Doug Ford gave power to the police to card again, but he doesn't have a problem with your bartender carding you or your flight attendant carding you.
Well, I mean, what he was talking about there was a very strange moment where Doug Ford said he was going to empower police to stop anyone on the street. And in one of the very rare moments of police responsibility in the last 2 years, some of the various police stations say, yeah, no, we're not doing that. But it's a bit it's a bit rich for Del Duca to complain about that, saying, where's our civil liberties? A man who just said he's going to bring back forced vaccination. I don't know, Sheila. I found this whole thing very depressing. I would not vote for any of those four parties on TV, or the fifth party being the media party. I think that it was a strategic decision by the state broadcaster and its journalists to keep out the two opposition parties on the right, which are running candidates across the province, which have a sitting MPP. They clearly were rigging it to keep out those folks. And it's a shame, because I think everyone would have had a better debate. It would have been a sharper contrast. The four parties of the left could have proven their bona fides to their left-wing base by really attacking Karahalios and Sloan, and vice versa. Karahalios and Sloan could have shown what true liberty or conservative meant. Now, I understand that we're a couple minutes away from scrums with the candidates. Let me check on that, because I would normally say, folks, what an awful, boring evening. I bet you it's going to have record low ratings. There simply was too much agreement. Government good, freedom bad, people racist. But let me check, because I understand that the first politician to come out to the scrum, I understand it's broken down every 15 minutes. That Del Duca is first at 8:15, and it's 8:17 right now, so he's expected any moment. Then the Green Party leader at 8:30. Then Andy Peer at 8:45, and then the PC's Doug Ford at 9. So first of all, it's 15 full minutes per candidate. Compare that, Sheila, to the debate you were at in Edmonton with the Conservative Party, where maybe they had like 2 minutes. I'll tell you one thing: they're not stingy with time here. This is a marathon of anything.
Yeah, it's weird. I'm curious, will all the candidates attend the scrums? Because I know that Pierre Poilievre didn't bother in Edmonton. Now,
I think Del Duca is up right now, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, let's go.
For years, and no meaningful effort brought forward to help bring them onto the field where we need them. And I think what was most clear on the healthcare discussion in tonight's debate, and by the way, I had a ton of fun up there. I hope you all enjoyed it as well. But what was really crystal clear to me is that Doug Ford's, frankly, deliberate decisions to prioritize private healthcare, private education, private interests when it comes to big box versus small entrepreneurs just doesn't wash in the province of Ontario. People want to deal with the surgical and diagnostic backlog, but they want it done in our public hospitals.
I guess, and just to follow up there, with your message to the nurses I've interviewed, and so is everybody, like they're just burnt out. They are. They're just tired. They're leaving. They're quitting. What's your message to them who might be? We've actually got a couple of texts from them saying they're just tired.
Well, they should be tired. I mean, they had been undervalued and disrespected for 4 years by the Ford Conservatives at every turn. It's absolutely unconscionable during a public health crisis in particular that Doug Ford has had no plan that he's brought forward, for example, to repeal Bill 124, despite the fact that every other party in the legislature would do it tomorrow if he would just call it forward and support it. That's just one example. But I think what they're also exhausted by is this notion that private care has been prioritized by the Ford Conservatives over public health care. I mean, if you were showing up to work every single day and you were talked down to and you were underfunded and you were called heroes, but that was never backed up with meaningful, competent action like the repeal of Bill 124, of course you would be exhausted and burnt out. And that's what we see with nurses. That's why that legislation needs to be repealed as a priority. We need to invest in the right way in public health care. An Ontario Liberal government that I lead will do that.
Hi, Stephen.
Hey.
We saw some of the most, I think, aggressive exchanges of the debate between yourself and Mr. Ford. Do you think that that's an approach that's going to work for people who maybe are on the edges of support for Ford and are thinking about where to cast their vote?
Look, I said this in my opening comments tonight. Every single election is about a choice. But in particular, at this moment, as we are so close, we all hope, to the end of COVID, coming out of this very difficult period, when so many people across Ontario are still struggling, what was clearly evident, I believe for everybody watching at home tonight, was that Doug Ford wants to pretend
that everything is okay. He wants to keep reading the same script in essence that he read 4 years ago. Don't know who it was written by 4 years ago, don't know who it was written by now, but it's so clear that he isn't capable of explaining what's in his head and what's in his heart in a direct way to the people of Ontario. It's like he wants to skate right by the past 2 years and ignore the fact that people are hurting in this province. That's why his budget didn't deal with any of the initiatives that we talk about in our Ontario Liberal plan. And I felt it was important to make sure people understand they have a choice in this election. Doug Ford and his team, who keep, pulling us down and pulling us backwards and holding us back. And the Ontario Liberal plan that is forward-looking, it is fully costed. It will be delivered starting on day one, and we will be held accountable to the commitments that we're making for the people of Ontario. I know this is already a long answer, but can I just say one more thing on this particular topic?
No.
I thought it was shameful that tonight Doug Ford was looking for pity from the people of Ontario as he talked about how hard he's worked and how tough it's been over the past couple of years. Doug Ford seems to not understand that's the job that he ran for 4 years ago. You don't just get to be premier when it's parades and sunshine. When you sign up for this job, when you take on this responsibility, yes, you have the job and the responsibility in good times, but also in tough times. I know the times have been tough, but Doug Ford wants to pretend everything is fine right now, and everything is not fine. And it will only get worse if he gets reelected on June 2nd.
Hi, Stephen.
Hi there.
You've pledged to scrap 413. You have a candidate in Brampton East who said you're actually not entirely against it. So to be clear, would you scrap that 413, or is it a consideration?
I know it's not a consideration at all. I believe the candidate's clarified her comments, and I said this earlier today when I spoke on this topic. The other leaders on the stage, the other opposition leaders, respectfully, they talk a good game about the 413. There is only one person running to be premier who has a demonstrated and proven track record of stopping that needless and reckless highway, and that's me. I did it in 2016 and 2017 when I was Minister of Transportation. So I am crystal clear on this, and I'm not just talking the talk. I have already walked the walk on this. Come June 2nd, should I earn the honor of governing this province at our first cabinet meeting, we will cancel Highway 413 and begin to invest your money, $10 billion, in building new schools and repairing schools right across Ontario.
You're maybe the least known candidate up there. Do you think that you did enough tonight to win the confidence and trust of voters to vote for the Liberal Party?
Well, look, I think voters will decide come June 2nd. What I was really excited about, which I said all the way through today and leading up to today, was to have the chance to talk directly to the voters of this province, the people of this province, so they understand what's at stake. They understand clearly that 4 more years of Doug Ford and his team will literally keep holding us back, dragging us down, and a more hopeful, forward-looking, balanced plan that is fully costed and has been fully costed from day one. A fully costed and responsible plan that will actually put people at the center of every single decision that we make. I think people saw that crystal clear and stark choice that sits right in front of them. And I think we are, 17 days away from Election Day. We'll let the people of this province decide.
Next question from Global News.
Hey, Mr. Hillier.
Hey, Colin.
You cautioned Andrea Horwath against targeting. You cautioned Andrea Horwath against targeting you during the debate because you said Doug Ford smiles every time she attacks you.
He does.
How concerned are you about the splitting of the vote on the progressive side, on the left side, so much so that the progressive Conservatives could run up the middle?
I don't think concerned is the right word that I would use if I'm describing the situation. And by the way, that's not a situation that began tonight. You will all know it started last May, June. The first round of negative ads, the attack ads that were launched by the NDP, actually targeted me. I don't think it's concern. I think it's disappointment. I think when you look at my plan and our plan and you look at Andrea Horwath's plan, I think there are some things that we have in common. For example, the repeal of Bill 124 or canceling Highway 413. I think if you're a progressive voter in this province, you want to see the outcomes. You're not so focused on necessarily who gets to deliver the outcomes. You just want to know that good things are going to happen for you and your family. And so I think it's been, I'll say for a lot of progressives that I hear from, disappointing that Ms. Horwath has spent a lot of time, maybe an equal amount, maybe even more time, attacking Ontario Liberals rather than taking to the fight where it belongs, which is what I've done. And that fight is with the Ford Conservatives, because I know, you know, everyone knows, 4 more years of Doug Ford
dragging us backwards, holding us down, holding us back is unacceptable to progressives across this province.
So we have a little over 2 weeks left in this campaign. Are you effectively now saying to Ms. Horvath, hey, let's hold hands and go in this together and fight Ford together? Is that what you're saying here?
No, I'm not changing anything I've done from the very beginning. You know this. You've all heard me speak over the past 2 years that I've been premier. Being leader of the party. I'm doing a lot of talking here. Being leader of the party, but here's the deal, and I kind of mentioned this tonight. Back in January of 2021, I placed calls to Andrea Horvath, Mike Schreiner, and frankly even Doug Ford on the issue of paid sick leave. A few months later, I did the same thing on vaccine certificates. It was the summer of 2021. In fact, I helped, and Mr. Schreiner was there, Ms. Horvath wasn't, and Mr. Ford wasn't. I helped convene a vaccine certificate summit, if I can call it that, in the summer of 2021. We did it again months later when the Omicron variant was making hospitals, putting hospitals into a real tough spot. Again, NDP and Green representatives as part of that summit, Mr. Ford not there. This is just my way of saying, again, I think I have a proven track record since becoming leader of being very comfortable working across party lines to deliver progress. So I'm not going to stop. I'm not here to attack Ms. Horvath. I'm not here to attack Mr. Schreiner. It's not even about attacking Doug Ford. It's a clear recognition that Doug Ford does not have the capacity or the interest or the understanding of his obligation to the people of Ontario to continue in this job. And he's made that abundantly clear for 4 years, and he made it abundantly clear on the stage tonight when he was looking for a pat on the back for allegedly taking on the tough responsibility of being premier. You shouldn't complain when you run for the job and you get the job and people put their faith in you to lead. So expecting a pat on the back when he has let down my kids and our parents and grandparents and those who care about the environment and workers and their families and small business owners, he should be ashamed of himself.
Next question comes from CBC News.
Hi, Stephen.
Hey, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Great.
Just on the fact that you brought up a lot of personal stories, referencing your daughters and your family a lot throughout this debate. It seems like, a bit of an effort to seem more relatable, if you will. So I want to ask you, do you think you're not relatable enough to voters right now?
I think it's just my story. I'm here with my wife tonight. She's right over there. And she and I, we live out in the suburbs. We have 2 daughters who attend publicly funded schools. We work hard the way that her parents and grandparents did, the way that my parents and grandparents did. My parents still do. We understand, I think, at our core, that every generation in this province has a fundamental responsibility. That's to honor the sacrifice and the legacy of the past generation, protecting our seniors at all times, and making sure that the next generation, our kids and grandkids, have access to exceptional opportunity. All of that is at risk right now with 4 more years of Doug Ford. That's why I'm back in this race. That's why I'm running to be premier. I will not let my daughters grow up in a province that gives them less opportunity than I had growing up here. So I think sharing stories helps people understand that I'm like them. We're like them. We face the same pressures. We face the same challenges. Everyone has a different story. There are unique aspects to everyone's story, but we rely on public health care. We rely on public education. We want to see our economy that grows because small businesses can thrive. And we want to make sure that our kids have safe water to drink and safe air to breathe. That's all. That's all it is.
In terms of sharing stories, you also shared one when asked about your regrets. You referenced the last election campaign and what you thought you could do better. So at this point in the campaign, what do you think you can improve on still?
What can I improve on still? Please don't ask my wife that question, okay? I'm sure that list will be much longer than my list. I think it's, look, I've always believed in the importance of hard work. You've all heard me say this repeatedly. There are no shortcuts to success in life. It is just about keeping your sleeves rolled up and continuing to work hard. I like to believe that I'm a good dad, but I think, look, it's the most important job that I'm ever going to have. And sometimes on the campaign trail, being away from Talia and Grace is not easy. I'm not able to take them to school every morning the way that I try to under normal circumstances. So might seem like a small thing, but it's pretty important to me, and I miss having that chance. So look, I know I'm not anywhere near perfect. I have a lot of improving to do in life, generally speaking. I'm just going to keep working at it.
Stephen, when it comes to the topic of the 413, you boast about being the only person on that stage who canceled the highway.
Yeah.
When challenged on other aspects of the Liberal record, you accused Doug Ford of trying to run the 2018 election again.
Yeah.
You seem to be willing to defend the Liberal record very narrowly on the 413 and not really engage on other issues or try to dismiss other criticisms. Is the Liberal record over 15 years fair game or not?
Well, I'll let the people of Ontario decide that, but I think what's fair to say, and I'm looking at most of you in the room tonight, I think many of you covered the 2018 election. I think it's pretty clear the people of Ontario had a chance to render a verdict on what they liked or didn't like in 2018, and they did. But there's no one in this province who thinks we're in the same spot today as we were 4 years ago, except for Doug Ford, who was literally reading a script like he took it from a binder from 4 years ago. Like, I heard the same messages tonight from Doug that we heard 4 years ago about jobs this and preparing people and this and hydro and all that stuff. I think the people of Ontario have gone through a real tough time over the past 2 years in particular. I think it is bizarre, irresponsible that the current premier of this province just wants to skate by the difficult time that we've had over the past 2 years, pretend everything is just fine, pretend everything is hunky-dory, as they say, and just get on with what comes next. He's, of course, hoping it's his re-election. I don't look at it that way. So I'm able to talk about 413 because 413 is relevant right now. Doug Ford wants to build it. He wants to reward his political donors. I don't. It's a proof point to show that I am serious about this issue because I dealt with it once. I will deal with it again. But it's not just about canceling the highway. It's about taking those $10 billion and investing it in public education, building new schools and repairing schools right across Ontario.
We're going to have to end there and keep the 15-minute allotted time. Sorry, I apologize. We're giving you 15 minutes to scrum.
Awesome.
But if you want to talk
Sure.
laterally,
Just as I'm walking. Okay.
No, just somewhere else.
Oh.
We're bringing a...
I can answer that as I'm walking.
I think they saw
a clear choice. Backwards and down with the forwards together with Ontario.
We're bringing in the Green Party leader, Mike Schreiner, now with a new randomized order. Thank you. First question goes to CTV.
Naturally.
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
I'm wondering if you feel like you did enough tonight to appeal to voters who might not have climate change and protection of the environment as their number one goal in this election.
Oh, absolutely. I think anyone who wants to stand up for nurses and understands how important it is to invest in people in addressing our healthcare capacity needs saw a champion in the Ontario Green Party. People who are concerned about affordability saw somebody who was willing to take on big oil to make transportation more affordable for folks, willing to talk about how to make housing more affordable, mental health services more affordable across a wide range of issues. People have told me their top concerns are affordability, addressing the capacity constraints in our healthcare system, and addressing the climate crisis, and I think we nailed all of those.
Are you frustrated at all that environmental concerns are not higher up on that list for the broader population?
No, I think it's my job to connect the dots for folks, to show people how we can address the climate crisis and the affordability crisis they're facing, to show them how we can improve healthcare in communities, to show them how we can build livable, affordable, sustainable communities where they don't have to commute long distances. And I feel like I did that tonight. I would say my biggest disappointment is how many people are saying, I wish Mike Schreiner led this party, or I wish Mike Schreiner led that party. I'll just say to folks, if you want green, vote green.
No.
Next question comes from CBC. No. Next question from Global.
Hi, Mr. Schreiner. I just wanted to get your thoughts on Mr. Ford bringing a binder. Did you notice the frequency of him referring to the binder? Did you feel like it was a crutch, or was it just an aid that he brought to the debate?
You know, I just want to say to folks that I speak from the heart, and I tell you exactly how I feel, what I believe in, what we're going to do to improve your lives. And I think that level of authenticity and the ability to talk to people honestly about what you believe in, what you stand for, and how you're going to make their lives better is really important. And it's unfortunate that, you know, maybe not every leader feels like they have the freedom to be that straight with folks.
Do you feel then that he was inauthentic during the debate when he had to refer down to his notes? And did anything stand out? Did a moment when he had to refer to his notes stand out to you?
You know, I think part of it is we need solutions, not slogans. And I think Mr. Ford is really good at delivering lots of slogans. And I don't know if that's what he was looking down at, was like, hey, I got to get the right slogan in here or not. But I think what the people of Ontario need and want is somebody who's going to stand up there and tell them that this is my vision for the province and these are the solutions I'm going to put forward to improve their lives.
Next question is to TVL. No. Next question is to CH.
Hi there. Right now,
Hi.
polls are showing that you're not going to win after this election. So for you, the best case scenario after the election to have positive climate change?
Yeah, elect more Green MPPs. I think we have a huge opportunity to increase our seat count at Queen's Park. I think most media observers have said that we punch well above our weight and have an outsized influence at Queen's Park. And if you look across the country, I look at 3 Green MLAs holding the balance of power in a minority government in British Columbia. I see Greens as the official opposition in a minority government in PEI. We have an opportunity, if voters are willing to elect more Greens to Queen's Park in this election, to strengthen our influence to deliver on the things that will improve Ontarians' lives.
Next question is City.
Hi, Mike. Question, do you think that the environment was discussed enough in this debate as an urgent issue?
You know, I obviously, you know, the Ontario Greens believe that the climate crisis is here. It's getting worse. It's bearing down on us. I mean, we're seeing people in northwestern Ontario being evacuated from their homes due to flooding right now. And we will continue to push for urgent action to address the crisis because we simply cannot afford to wait. And that's exactly why we need more Green MPPs at Queen's Park. I obviously made it, I think, very clear to voters tonight that we're not a one-issue party. We have sound policies on a variety of issues. But I also made it clear to the people of Ontario that we can address the climate crisis, we can create jobs and improve our economy by being the global leader in the new climate economy. And I think I also showed people how we can address their affordability concerns while addressing the climate emergency.
Open questions?
I think one of the things they took away from the debate tonight is that the Green Party's arrived. We're ready to take our place at Queen's Park and deliver the Ontario people want, providing the leadership we need to get there. And I believe I offered new solutions to old problems, and it's about time that the people of Ontario had another option from the 3 old line parties that have failed to address some of the major issues of our time: the housing affordability crisis, the climate emergency, and the deteriorating state of our healthcare system, and the need to invest in people and to also ensure that we address the mental health needs of the people of this province. Yeah, I don't think Mr. Del Duca wants to defend the previous Liberal government's record. And, you know, it was an opportunity for him to actually stand up and defend the government he was a part of, and he chose not to take that opportunity.
If you don't mind me saying, you were a little sterner out there than we've seen you before. I think you have sort of a reputation as, you know, a bit friendlier, but you weren't afraid to go on the attack a little bit. What's behind that?
I think it's a now or never situation when it comes to addressing the climate crisis. I mean, how many more reports have to come from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the UN, just saying, like, it is now or never, folks. The urgency of our need to act, not only to ensure a livable future for ourselves and our children and grandchildren, but to ensure that Ontario is positioned to be the global leader in the new climate economy. That's where the emerging markets are. 65 million new jobs globally will be created between now and 2030 in the new climate economy. Like, is Ontario going to lead that? are we going to create those jobs? Are we going to generate that prosperity that we can then invest in building the kind of Ontario we want? And to me, the urgency of the issue requires me to be a bit more forceful than maybe I am day to day at Queen's Park. Well, you know, I mean, clearly the Ford government has no climate plan whatsoever. I mean, the Auditor General and numerous other experts have clearly pointed out that it's a made-to-fail climate plan. I believe that the days of half measures that the NDP and Liberals have put forward are just insufficient to meet this moment that we're in. This moment to finally do our part to crush climate pollution and ensure our economy is ready to succeed in the emerging markets.
Mr. Schreiner, thank you for being here tonight. There is a Canadian entrepreneur who has a patent pending on an inexpensive and effective retrofit to utilize on existing vehicles using ammonia fuel. As an environmental party, why haven't you investigated this cheap and safe alternative fuel?
Yeah, I think I know the entrepreneur you're talking about. I've met with him on more than one occasion, and certainly we've talked about the importance and viability of not only ammonia, but also green hydrogen are two effective technologies that Ontario should be a global leader in, especially as we look at the EU and just this horrific, senseless invasion, Putin's invasion of Ukraine and how it's disrupted international energy markets. And Ontario is well positioned to supply the European Union both with green hydrogen and ammonia. And those are technologies that we should be developing because they're huge job and prosperity opportunities for the province.
Quick follow-up as well. You spoke a lot about farmers and preserving farmland, and yet farmers hate the carbon tax. How do you reconcile that?
Yeah, well, first of all, rebating our carbon fee and dividend rebates and recycles those revenues back to individuals. So most individuals, including farmers, actually will end up with more money in their pocket. And also we've created a fund that will help farmers reduce their fossil fuel use, helping them save money in a variety of ways. Here's the bottom line is, we are losing 175 acres of farmland in Ontario each and every day, 5 family farms a week. It is completely unsustainable to continue to lose the land that feeds us. I think the disruption we're seeing in international food supply chains right now, the disruptions we saw in all supply chains, but also food supply chains during the pandemic, highlights the fact that we have to prioritize our own food security, and that means protecting the land that feeds us. And we know that we can address the housing affordability crisis without paving over that land that feeds us.
Jay with Rebel News. You plan to address the housing crisis by building 100,000 new affordable units. So how does this help people trying to buy into the housing market with the record level inflation that we're seeing?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, the Ontario Greens put forward a very comprehensive housing affordability strategy last June that some have called a masterclass plan in delivering the solutions we need. It clamps down on rampant speculation in the housing market because we believe homes should be for people, not speculators. And so putting first-time home buyers on a level playing field, especially if you look at the number of corporations and speculative real estate investment entities that they're having to compete against. Secondly, we're the first party that called for removing exclusionary zoning rules that prevent people from rapidly increasing housing supply and providing more choice through duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, making it easier for people to build laneway housing, tiny homes, secondary suites. We think that's the fastest pathway to building the 1.5 million homes that I know all parties have endorsed, but we actually have policy to back it up. And finally, the third critical component is the federal and provincial governments got out of investing in housing in the mid-1990s, and the crisis has been getting worse ever since then. Obviously, now it's at a breaking point, and a whole generation of people are wondering, one, will they be able to afford to buy a house, and two, even pay rent. And so our commitment to supporting nonprofit and co-ops and other community-based affordable rental homes will help ensure that we provide housing along a continuum. And I want to be clear, the 60,000 permanent supportive housing spaces we've committed to with wraparound mental health, addictions and other supports, quality studies, I'll say, show that for every $10 invested in permanent supportive housing returns $21.72 back to government in reducing other costs, particularly healthcare costs, criminal justice costs, social service costs, etc. And it was one of the reasons I brought that issue up in the health section, because so many doctors now are recognizing the connection between pressure on our healthcare system and the lack of safe, stable housing supply for people.
Any other questions? Okay.
Thank you.
We're going to bring in NDP leader Andrea Horvath, and the order first question for the NDP comes from CPC.
Well, a couple questions there from our rebels, Tamara Ugolini and Lincoln Jay. Here's Andrea Horwath taking a mask off.
Hi, Andrea. Hi. We saw, I guess I'm just wondering if, based on tonight's debate, if you're worried about the splitting of the vote at all, if you feel like you've done enough to put space between yourself and the Liberal Party.
I think tonight's debate showed that the Conservatives and the Liberals spent a lot of time fighting over who had the worst record. And what I was able to do is show people that you can actually have a government this time that prioritizes the things that matter most to you, that fixes the things that matter most to you. That's what I think people need to know, is that there's hope. In order to do that, we have to defeat Doug Ford. In order to do that, we have to come together. The NDP's got the best shot at defeating Doug Ford.
Are you worried, though, because it did seem like Mr. Del Duca and Mr. Ford were scrapping it out a lot more than maybe you were in the mix of that you get kind of lost in that conversation about who's best to be opposition or to be the new government?
Not at all. I think Mr. Del Duca spent a lot of time trying to distance himself from his record in government, and that's disappointing. I mean, leaders should, they should take responsibility for their records. He obviously didn't want to do that. I think it's because he doesn't want to remind people at how disappointed folks were with 15 years of Liberals, and that, that they were shown that disappointment by only getting 7 seats last time around, and Mr. Del Duca losing his seat. They are going into this campaign with those 7 seats. We had 40, so we're really 10 seats, as few as 10 seats away from defeating Doug Ford. That's job number one. That's job number one for people who know that we can do better and that we should be doing better and fixing the things that matter most.
Andrea, what did you make of Mike Schreiner's presence on the debate stage? You've done a few of these debates now, but this is the first one with a Green Party representative on it. Did you think it changed the tenor of what you had to do as a leader?
That's a good question, and I welcome Mike's contributions and his comments. He does, however, suggest a pretty dangerous path. I think we would all agree that 6 out of 10 folks in this province don't want to see Doug Ford with another term, because his cuts, his chaos, they hurt people. We can't do the things that people want us to do to fix what's broken with more cuts from Doug Ford. So job number one has to be defeating Doug Ford. And so I think the advice that Mr. Schreiner was giving is a bit risky for voters this time. This time, it's the NDP that can defeat Doug Ford, and that's why I ask people, let's come together and take care of that job. Let's get rid of Doug Ford and start fixing the things that are broken.
So do you think you did enough, not just to distance yourself from the Liberals, which you've had to do historically, but also from the Green Party tonight?
I think Mike Schreiner has a lot of good ideas. Many of them we've been talking about for years and years and years. The NDP has, for that matter, and I'm not going to ever stop listening to some of the things that Mr. Schreiner brings forward. There are some things that we don't agree on, but the bottom line is we have a job to do here in Ontario, and that job is to defeat Doug Ford. because we can't afford more cuts. People can't afford more cuts. The cuts that the Conservatives always make, they hurt people. They hurt our healthcare system. They hurt our education system. They hurt our seniors in long-term care. We had some of those cuts with the Liberals in office. People know that. That's why they were so disappointed after 15 years of Liberal promises that turned into disappointments. Now we have a chance to stop these cuts and move on to a government that's prepared to take on the things that matter most to people and prepared to make those investments, because folks are hurting right now. Not only the aftermath of the pandemic, but the cost of everything going through the roof. People worried about how they're going to keep their roof over their head. Tenants worried about whether they're going to get rent-evicted by their landlord. These are all things that we can fix, but we have to have the chance to do it. And the only way of doing that is to defeat Doug Ford and come together to form an NDP government that can begin that work.
Next question from CH.
You mentioned housing prices and bringing them down. How specifically are you going to do that? And are you worried about an overcorrection or causing a recession?
Not at all. What we're hearing right now and seeing right now are young people who have decided to give up. They've given up on their dreams to ever own their first home. I was talking about this in the debate. I'm hearing from families who are saying our kids are thinking of trying to get their own home, but they have to literally move, across the province to try to find something affordable. I talked to a woman who's a grandma in southwestern Ontario and said she's going to move to the other side of the province in the north because she can't afford anything nearby, and it's breaking her heart that she can't be with her grandkids. People shouldn't be having to make these decisions. There are people that are not growing their families, that are deciding not to have that second or third child because they can't afford a bigger space to be able to grow their family. We can fix that. We can fix it in a number of different ways, including helping first-time home buyers with their mortgage, with their down payment rather. We can do that by making sure we're building more and spurring the building of more missing middle housing. Things like like starter homes, like smaller homes that you can get into the market, duplexes, triplexes, townhouses. We're not going to do it with Mr. Ford spending billions and billions and billions of dollars to build massive highways to mansions that nobody can afford because it helps his buddies and his developer friends. We also want to get the speculation out of the market, so we have some plans on doing exactly that. And of course, when it comes to renters, we have a lot of work to do to get rid of the damage that has been done by first the Harris Conservatives, then 15 years of the Liberals not undoing that damage when it comes to our rental market. And of course, things have gotten so bad in the last 4 years. We're going to bring rent controls back and stabilize the rental market, as well as building affordable housing and supportive housing, because we know that people need it in Ontario.
Follow up with healthcare. Hamilton Health Sciences, biggest employer in Hamilton, experiencing the biggest staffing crisis they've ever experienced. People are calling in sick, not showing up, and they're building a new hospital in Grimsby. What's your message to the employers, and where are those new staff going to come from?
Well, that's exactly the point that we were trying to make today, that I was trying to make today in the debate, and that I've mentioned many times before. Building hospital beds is good, obviously. We're going to be building some hospitals in Brampton, in Scarborough. We have some plans to do the same thing, but the key is beds do nothing without staff. And if we don't have the staff, the beds mean nothing. They're glorified hotel rooms. And so what we've got is a plan to do exactly that. We're going to hire 20,000 nurses, 10,000 PSWs. We're going to get internationally trained professionals. We have 15,000 internationally trained nurses here right now in Ontario, and we're going to get 2,000 of those folks immediately working. We have a plan to make sure those people can get accredited, and I did mention in the debate one example of a doctor that was trained in Bangladesh who lives in Fort Erie, crosses the border every day to work as a doctor in Buffalo because she can't practice as a doctor here in Ontario. This isn't a new problem. It's been ongoing for decades, but we are going to fix it, and we're going to make sure that all those people that sat on the side sidelines that could have been helping us during COVID-19 are going to be able to help us fix the problem in our staffing situation. But also it's Bill 124. Doug Ford and his low-wage policies are chasing healthcare workers out of the healthcare system. Nurses feel disrespected. PSWs, all the healthcare workers that I'm talking to and that have been contacting me are saying we have to get rid of the low-wage policy. We have to scrap 124, which is what I've committed to doing, and make sure that we're not only attracting new workers into the field and making sure we have an environment that will retain them, but also invite back some of those healthcare workers that have walked away because Doug Ford treated them like dirt. A lot of those folks are the most experienced, in fact, and we can use them to help us mentor new recruits and to help us make sure that the increase in staffing is one that comes with some supports and training.
Hi, good evening, Ms. Horvath. Mr. Del Duca was pretty clear today that by attacking him, he said you were making Doug Ford smile. I'm wondering if you feel like, given that 40% of the province seems to be supporting the Progressive Conservatives, and that is enough, as we saw in the last election, to form a majority government, do you feel like it's time in the last 2 weeks of this election campaign to start working together to achieve that joint objective, or are you still going to split your focus and your attacks and aim them at both men?
Well, not at all. I think that what people know is that this election is one at which there's a lot at stake. I mean, there's a lot at stake this time. Stephen Del Duca didn't even field candidates in every single riding this time around. He doesn't have candidates in every part of Ontario. He's just not ready to form a government, but we are. We have 40 candidates going in that are strong, that are experienced, that are ready, and that are prepared to do the work to start fixing the things that are broken. And I think that that's what voters who don't want to see Doug Ford back in the Premier's chair this time around, that don't want to see that happen. That's what I ask them to think about. I'm asking those folks. You might have voted Liberal in the past to keep Conservatives out, but this time it's the NDP that has the strength, that has the capacity, that's ready. We're your best shot at getting rid of Doug Ford and starting to fix the things that matter most. And that's my message to voters. There's a couple weeks left, and that's what I need to continue to let people know, is that they have that option to vote for the party that can defeat Doug Ford. We're only 10 seats, fewer than 10 seats away, or as few as 10 seats away from defeating Doug Ford, right? Sheet of paper on everybody's podium that just went through the structure so that we could keep on track as to where we were on the debate. And I was really grateful for that. It was really thoughtful, and I appreciated it. Yes, Mr. Ford was beside me. He had his binder, and he certainly did refer to it quite a bit. That was his choice. That was his decision. From what I could see, none of the other candidates had a binder or any written notes, pre-written notes.
Next question from CBC News.
Andrea, Doug Ford mentioned that the PCs had the support of multiple unions this time around, and considering that a lot of the unions are typically NDP voters, is the relationship between the NDP and unions broken?
Oh, not at all. Not at all. It's interesting, though, to note that a lot of the workers in this province that work in construction, as an example, are out on strike. And what I'm hearing from unionized construction workers, particularly people like the carpenters, who I just spoke to the other day, is that they're really concerned that Doug Ford has set a system in place in this province that favors low wages. That's what Bill 124 does. It's a piece of legislation that caps wages at 1% a year, while inflation's going as much as 5 and 6%, and it means people's ability to keep up with the bills becomes more and more difficult. And so when I went to talk to the carpenters there, they said to me, the reason why we can't get an agreement is because our employers want to keep our wages low, just like Doug Ford is keeping the wages of nurses and PSWs low. I think that working people know very well that New Democrats are on their side all the time, before elections, during elections, and after elections. We're not fair weather friends, but we stand up for working people, and I do personally, but New Democrats do as well, always.
We have 1 minute left in this round. Follow-up.
But what does it say that unions like the Boilermakers are publicly supporting the PCs?
Well, you'll have to ask them, but I certainly do know that that the commitments to working people will never end for me, and that when you look at a party that not only is working for working people before and during and after elections, but also cares about things like how you pay your bills and whether you can get the dental care you need without having to shell out of your pocket, whether you can get the mental health supports you need with your OHIP card and not your credit card, making sure our hospital systems are there for our healthcare system there for people that need to have some surgeries done or some procedures undertaken. These are things that matter to people, to families, long-term care, home care, so that seniors can age at home with the supports they need with dignity and good quality of life. There's just no doubt that working people need to have a government that's on their side and that's making not only costs that are less, lightening the pocketbook pressure, but also respecting them as workers and making sure that the wages that they receive are wages that pay the bills.
We're going to have to stop there. That's the 15-minute allocated scrum time for the NDP.
Thanks, everyone.
We'll bring in Ford second for his 15 minutes. Scrum with PC leader Doug Ford starts with a question from TVO.
Hi.
Hi,
Well, first of all, before you ask me the question, I think TVO did a great job tonight. So thank you.
I'll tell Steve.
Suck up.
Stephen Del Duca said that you don't just get to be premier when it's sunshine and parades. You defended your record during the debate. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on how people at home might have seen you say that, it was tough decisions, we did what I could. Do you worry that came off as plaintive?
Well, you know something, there was tough decisions all the way through, and I always said every decision I made was in the best intention with the best medical advice that I had at the time, and I appreciate the advice that I received off the chief medical officer and all the other doctors. But well, the only thing that kind of bothers me is someone that sits on the sidelines didn't do anything throughout the pandemic, either one of them, and they criticize. So that was my point. But something, we're moving through this. We're going to focus on the economy and jobs, and people are going to have a very clear choice on June the 2nd. You're going to have a choice between the three parties that want to jack up the taxes, want to hike up gas taxes, want to hike up, bring back the license plate stickers, want to bring back the tolls, because Stephen Del Duca and Kathleen wouldn't put the tolls on there and jacked them up every single year. We're getting rid of the tolls. We already have. We're got rid of the license plate stickers. We're putting more money back into people's pocket. And under the Liberals and NDP, they lost 300,000 jobs. We've gained 550,000 with 338,000 in the waiting.
Follow-up video. Next question is from CBC.
Hi there. Just on the pandemic, you said it was the most challenging time of your life and that you didn't get everything right. So can you specify exactly what you didn't get right?
Well, something I really relied when it came to anything to do with health. I said it right from the get-go. I'm not an expert in health. I think I'm pretty strong on the economy. But, I take the advice off the chief medical officer at the time and other doctors. And, there's always a slip-up. All I know is that if there was a slip-up at all, I'd come out, apologize, make sure it never happens again. Not too many elected officials come out and admit when they're wrong. I have no problem. If something is wrong, we're going to correct the problem and make sure it never happens. But what I never want to happen, I never want to have a future premier or administration ever to face what we had to face. When we were looking for PPE, the cupboards were empty. The previous government didn't restock them after SARS. I physically drove out there and looked at the warehouse. The good news, I called out for help. I called out, and there was 26,000 companies went on our portal in 2 days, and now we're self-sufficient. We created a whole sector of N95 masks and surgical masks and gowns and shields and gloves and so on and so forth. We'll never have to rely on anyone again.
In North Bay, after the debate, you did not stay to answer reporter questions. Noticed you had a binder with notes in this debate. The question is, are you afraid of making a mistake?
No, you know something? I don't think actually, out of all three leaders, no one has been in front of the press more than I have throughout the 4 years. And I'm out here today, and do you know what people worry about? They don't worry about if I show up or don't show up. What they worry about is who's going to create jobs for the future, who's going to put money back into my pocket, who's going to reduce my taxes, who's going to build a strong healthcare system. We're doing it all. We get things done. For years, they talk about it, we get it done.
Hi, Mr. Ford. That was Lisa Shing, by the way. You were supposed to
Lisa,
name some legislation after her.
You know something, Lisa, I sincerely want to help you. And here's a good example about listening to people. And I mentioned you in our meeting the other day.
No, sorry, Mr. Ford. That was not my question. I just
I
wanted to point out that
want to
was
give Lisa
Shing.
credit. Lisa was the person that prompted us to get air conditioning in all the long-term care facilities. So thank you, Lisa. I mentioned you in our meeting the other day, and I listened to even the media. Even you sometimes, Colin.
All right, Mr. Ford.
Sometimes. Go ahead.
So on the binder that you brought up today, I think there were a lot of people who were watching who noticed that you were occasionally had to glance down at the binder to refresh your memory. Okay, why were you so reliant on pre-written notes?
You got the premier of the province,
why couldn't
and
you
this is
speak
what you're asking
from the
about.
heart or from the mind, as the other
Two
leaders
questions
stated?
about why did you glance
Colin,
down
I've
at the
been in more
binder?
Debates, and so have you.
You got them now.
And they asked
across the country.
They asked the other
federally, municipally,
leaders about
there's
Doug
nothing
Ford's
wrong with
binder. I
putting
think this
notes
is
to
binder
make sure
question
you're
number 5.
organized.
It's
Matter of
clearly the
fact,
most
North
important
Bay,
issue for
they
Ontario
had their
voters.
notes, and I had my notes.
Why
They
was
had the
Doug
choice to
using
bring
a
it.
binder?
But guess what? People don't care about
What kind
that.
of binder
You know what
was
they care
it?
about? They care about jobs of the future.
Kilroy?
They care about their kids when they get
It's a
out of
kill
college.
shot. I got him on the binder.
They have a proper job to go to.
You're going down,
Getting
Doug
them
Ford.
prepped to have a better
binder.
opportunity than anyone else.
He had a binder.
To follow up on the previous questions on the
550,000 jobs with
binder,
338,000 in the wage.
because as if these journalists
we have the
aren't
economy
reading from their own
humming
notes.
right now. We're going to continue
Right.
by creating an environment for companies to thrive and prosper and grow. We're competing against. We aren't competing against the people down the street. We're competing against folks over in Europe, down in South America, over in Asia, all over the world, and the United States. And guess what? We're beating them. We're beating them because
But what
we're
about the
creating
binder? So
environment.
you didn't answer
Ford,
the
one
binder
of
question.
the attack lines from your opponents always has to do about Bill 124. Bill 124 is set to expire this year. Are you giving public sector employees your assurances that you will not be bringing any kind of legislation that will restrict their ability to negotiate a fair increase as they would see it?
Well, Colin, when it expires, I think one's in August, and we'll sit down and fairly negotiate with the union at the time. And I think the world of our frontline healthcare workers. We actually gave them a $5,000 retention bonus. I call it a thank you. That's an average of 7.6% increase. We made sure that the PSWs were taken care of, like the other government didn't. We gave them a $3 an hour increase permanently. So always make sure that the people that are working hard for the public are going to be taken care of.
Mr. Ford, you've talked a lot about higher wages in the province and how they're a good thing. So how do you justify keeping Bill 124 in place while talking up higher wages for everybody outside of those public sector unions?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'll repeat what I said. When we sit down and this expires, we'll negotiate fairly with them, and we'll have a great relationship moving forward. I think we did in the past. I made sure that we recognize the frontline healthcare workers, and I appreciate everything they did, every one of them. I love our police and our firefighters, so we're going to negotiate fairly with everyone.
Promises to this point have focused on people who drive. So, promises to build new highways, break on the gas tax, the license plate sticker renewal. What help is there for people who are not driving because they just don't, it doesn't make sense, or they can't afford to begin with?
You know something, thank you for that question. My goodness, we spent the largest amount in Canadian history with the support of the federal government, working collaboratively, and the municipal government. You know, we're building the largest subway system in North America. We're building 4 lines. We didn't talk about it. The Liberals and NDP built nothing in 15 years. In 4 years, actually it's less than 4 years, in 3 years, we have tunnel boring machines right now boring the tunnel. And I just want to thank our municipal partners, no matter if it's up in Markham or the 905. I want to thank Mayor Tory. He was an absolute champion about building the subway system. And I really want to thank the federal government for collaborating and cooperating with us. We couldn't have done it alone. And that's, you know, I don't worry about political stripes. We've worked together with all 3 levels of government. And do you know who benefits? The people benefit. So we're going to continue to pour money into transit, which we have, on top of the GO Rail system that we're expanding all across the province. So we're going to continue to make sure that transit's a priority, and it's environmentally really, really good to get people out of the cars, get them into transit, because right now, you up on that subway system that hasn't changed in 50 years, you're packed in there like sardines. So now people are going to have an opportunity. We're building the Scarborough subway, we're building the Ontario line. And I just want to quote Ontario line, vast majority of the ridings, they aren't our ridings, but it doesn't matter. I want to get people out of the car. We're building the Eglinton West, and we're building the Yonge extension all the way up to Markham. And Mayor Scarbitti, thank you. I appreciate your support on the Yonge North extension and the other mayors up in that region too.
Next question is to City News.
Hi, Mr. Ford.
Hi.
You didn't tonight launch any big, you didn't take the bait from your opponents. You didn't launch any big attacks. What happened to the old Doug Ford? Was he too harsh? Was he too divisive?
You know, I don't feel I needed to land any attacks. The people are going to have a clear choice. You have 3 parties that want to jack up your taxes, want to raise gas prices, so they want an additional carbon tax. They want to bring back the license plate stickers and the tolls. I don't. We're going to start building infrastructure. We're building the 413, the Bradford Bypass, Highway 7. I could list them all. Widening Highway 3. There's a whole list of highways that we're building. That's what people want to see. And we're going to continue building hospitals. We have 50 major projects, $40 billion in new hospitals in every single region across this province. We're building schools. As the Liberals and NDP close 600 schools, we're building 100 schools, investing $14 billion into schools. So we're a government that builds, and we're going to continue building.
On the question of combating hate and addressing the rise of racism, we didn't hear much there tonight. You have a candidate who's in charge of education who participated in a so-called slave auction not too long ago. How can voters be confident that you and your party understand and are committed to combating the rise in hate?
Well, we've dealt with this right from the day we got in office. I'll have zero tolerance for any hate for any group anywhere in Ontario. It's not going to be tolerated, especially here in Ontario. Zero tolerance.
This is a question directly from a nurse, and so I'm going to read it word for word because it is from a nurse to you.
Yep.
How do you plan on fixing the nursing crisis and repeal Bill 124? He says you repeatedly ignored it every single time. I challenge you to get him to answer it. So I think they're looking maybe for a yes or no answer.
Yeah, not a problem. First of all, I want to thank her for her service. How we're attracting new nurses. First of all, we're the first government ever willing to pay for their tuition and their books, as long as they serve in underserved areas. I was up in Timmins. They're in desperate need of nurses right across the province, especially in the rural areas. We're in desperate need. On credentialing, we have 1,000 international nurses that we're going to be hiring, and we're going to make sure we make it attractive for nurses to come and have a great opportunity in a career. See, nurses don't look at it as a job. It's a career. It's a passion. And I appreciate all the work they've done.
Although you said right there you're going to make it attractive for nurses to get into the career. How are you going to make it attractive?
Well, again, I'll go back and, the $5,000, they call it retention pay. I call it a thank you. That's on an average, a 7.6% increase throughout this year. Anyone show me any province in this whole country that's given the nurses a 7.6% increase. And we're going to make sure we take care of nurses. When we sit down to negotiate with Catherine Hoy, and by the way, Catherine, I'm sure you're listening. You came into my office and you had a laundry list of everything you needed. And guess what? We fulfilled that laundry list. I know you still have an issue, Bill 24, but we're going to make sure that we treat our frontline healthcare workers very well. Same with PSWs. We're hiring 27,000 new PSWs. And by the way, the Liberals and NDP, they fired 1,600 nurses. And guess what? We've hired over 5,000. We're going to continue hiring nurses and PSWs.
We have a minute 45 left for non-consorting questions.
Well, I think the viewers are going to have a very clear choice. They have three parties. They have their vision about raising taxes. They never got anything done. They had a chance for 15 years. They built zero transit. They built zero hospitals. They closed 600 schools. They jacked up the HIDA rates to the highest in North America. They drove 300,000 jobs out of the province. In 4 short years, in a pandemic, we ended up creating an environment for 550,000 new jobs, 338,000 in the waiting to fill the jobs. We have the economy moving. We invested $40 billion in new hospitals, $14 billion with new schools. Everyone seems to be getting a new hospital in every region in Ontario. We're investing billions and billions of dollars into healthcare. Unprecedented amounts that no government in this country has ever invested the amount that we're investing compared to the Liberals and NDP. As the previous Minister of Health under the Liberals said, we starve the healthcare. Talk to OMA. Do you know what they said? They wouldn't even talk to the doctors. They've never been treated worse under the Liberal and NDP than they were back then. We have an incredible relationship. We signed a great deal with the doctors. And docs, I appreciate everything you're doing.
To split the trade unions away from the NDP?
No, I didn't have to do anything. You know, thank you for the question. For the first time ever, they're saying forget about the NDP, forget about the Liberals. They know the job's not going to get done. They came up, and I just want to thank. Hold on, can I just finish?
The money that you're spending,
sir. Can I just finish for a minute? The electrical workers, thank you so much. The Boilermakers, thank you, and Leuna, thank you. They have confidence in us that we're investing $156 billion in infrastructure, and that's creating great jobs. We're investing $1 billion into skilled trades. 1 out of every 5 jobs are going to be in skilled trades in 2025. So I want to thank the unions and stay tuned. There's a whole raft more of trade unions that are going to be supporting us. Just stay tuned.
That's allocated 15 minutes.
Premier? Okay, thanks everyone. Thank you.
Sheila, it has mercifully come to an end. I think you and I started on here almost 4 hours ago.
Yep.
The debate, I think it was excruciating because it was, as you correctly put it, 3 leftists proposing woke, radical, interventionist ideas, and Doug Ford saying, okay, but let's just be reasonable. I agree, but maybe a little bit slower.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm glad we got a couple of questions in there from Rebel reporters. I didn't know until 20 minutes ago that their rule was mainstream media reporters first. If there's no more questions from them, only independent journalists can go after that.
Yeah, you could tell. You could tell everybody knew that because it was long Kamala Harris rambling questions and then people getting paid by the words they use, answers. Yeah. It was just the journalists knew we're going to rag the puck, we're going to drag this out, and obviously the politicians knew that too. But did you notice the left-wing politicians were the ones that like Horvath and Del Duca, the consortium wanted to ask them all the questions. There was no time left over for the independent journalists with those two. You can see who the media is stumping for because there was an opportunity, I think 90 seconds or something, for an independent journalist to ask something to Doug Ford. The journalists aren't even the consortium journalists aren't even interested in talking to Doug Ford. They were done after they had.
Yeah, they sort of hustled him out of there, which is weird. I mean, there was no one left after him. Here's the premier. You don't have anything more to say to him. You know,
except his binder.
That's 4 hours I'll never get back. I want to say
I'm
thanks.
older for it.
You know what? It was hard for me, and you're not even in Toronto. You won't even have to live under the results of this election. I think this is going to have a dismal ratings. I don't think people are watching. I don't think there's a sufficient difference amongst the candidates. I think the media party truly is a thing in Ontario. I mean, really, what was the difference between the question askers and the question answers, either in the debate or the scrum afterwards? Listen, I'm glad we covered it, and I'm glad our team was down there. We had 4 journalists on the scene. Special thanks to Olivia and Efron for working late here. Sheila, I tell you, I'm deeply grateful to you for enduring this, even though you're not an Ontarian. I think that this shows that you need to have a Conservative Party that is conservative. And it would have been quite a different thing if either or both Karahalios and Sloan were there tonight actually disagreeing.
Yeah, it was very, what's the right word I'm looking for? Grayish, gray and beige, like equally boring. That's what it was tonight. It was very just nothing but homogeneity. I do know that, we've got a question we've got Lincoln. So our team was not able to get questions to Del Duca, but they scrummed him in the hallway. He was not safe from Rebel journalists. They got him in the hallway. And it looks like Lincoln was trying to scrum Doug Ford in the hallway too. So we might have that clip if the guys can pull it up in the studio there.
All right, let's take a look.
Mr. Ford, why'd you flip, Mr. Ford?
Guys, he's done taking questions.
Mr. Ford, why'd you flip-flop
on the vaccine? Questions.
Why'd you flip-flop on the vaccine passport? Good try.
Well, you tried. You tried. You asked a question that in the hours of debate, not a journalist or opponent thought to ask him. If anything, they said, "Why did you dial it back?" There was only a fake concern for civil liberties when, for 10 minutes, Doug Ford proposed stop and frisk for random people on the streets. Del Duca said that was a violation of civil liberties. Yeah,
he said, no, just do it to the unvaccinated is what Del Duca wanted.
You know, that question that Lincoln put there was a question that not a single journalist or opponent put to Doug Ford. Why did you do this? Yeah. Why did you take away civil liberties for millions of your fellow citizens when you swore you wouldn't? Imagine that. Not a single mainstream media journalist or the media consortium, it's a perfect name for them, the Borg, thought of asking that. That shows you the complete merger of journalists and politicians in this country. Sheila, it is so late. I see that we have...
I think we have two.
Why don't you read them out? 2 super chats.
Sure. 2 super chats. You know what else? You know who is noticeably absent from all of this? Brian Lilly. But I'm going to keep my comments to myself. Anyway, World's Worst Gamer gives us a buck and says, "Go New Blue." And Annalisa, 1964, long-suffering live stream watcher of the daily live stream, but also all of our after-hours live streams, the Rebel After Dark live streams. And she gives us $10 and says, "I'm not sure I can watch this debate to the end." Well, Annalisa, I did it for you, so you didn't have to. What a bunch of flapping ducks. Other than that, love my Rebel News. So I think you watched because of us and not because you were even remotely entertained by what the politicians had to say, and I appreciate that. And I think that's it. Ezra, your beard is longer and grayer.
That's right. You know what? I don't know. It's not really working. I'm trying to grow a beard. I think it's been a disaster. At a certain point, we're going to have to pull the plug on it. Sheila, thanks very much for staying up late and for caring as an Albertan. You're probably the only Albertan who watched this debate. Near the end, you were one of a handful of people anywhere still watching it. So thanks for that. Special thanks to our team, Olivia and Efron, here in the office at the studio, and Isabel, David, Lincoln, and Tamara on location. And if I've missed anyone, I apologize. To our viewers, thank you for your support. Until tomorrow, on behalf of all of us here at Rebel World Headquarters, to you at home, good night, and keep fighting for freedom.